Chapter 13:13. Ever since the outbreak of the war on the Western Front, the Sky Lord's thinking had changed drastically. His understanding of humans came from various war reports and Holy See meetings. Apart from the obviously contemptuous remarks of the insects, it was common knowledge among the senior lords that the humans lacked enough awakened warriors. The difficulty of their advancement was comparable to that of the humans, but their abilities could not be determined in advance. This made the overall strength of the humans extremely unstable. As for the males without magic power, they were purely extras on the battlefield, equivalent to the inferior members of the race. The latter were completely abandoned after the first battle of divine will. They did not even have the right to participate in the war and could only be used as laborers at most. From this, one could see the huge difference in strength between the two races. The Sky Sea realm had evolved even more thoroughly. Be it the ships that devoured continents or the most basic warriors, they all had highly similar magic power. It was as though they were specially designed for war. Even the demonic beasts that were eroded and controlled by them would grow into demonic bodies. They were undoubtedly the strongest of the four races. Because of this, after the end of the second battle of divine will, the upper echelons saw the legacy shard of the humans as theirs. This was also the reason why Osruk's last words caused an uproar in the presiding Holy See. But now, Haxord increasingly felt that it might not be an exaggeration. If the humans' unimaginable use of fire was not enough to raise the king's vigilance, then the discovery of the enemy's new weapon 2 weeks ago was a completely different matter. A human male, an individual that was seen as an extra, flew into the sky on a strange-looking iron bird without the help of a witch. When it first heard the news, its first reaction was that it was impossible. Since ancient times, apart from birds and beasts, the sky had always been the domain of those who possessed magic power. In addition to the saying that God came from beyond the sky, it made the sky above even more sacred. How could those races that did not even have magic power be involved in this sacred domain? However, there were more than one witness. Haxord, who had just accepted this with great difficulty, realized that the humans' advancement might not only be related to fire. That's right, it was beginning to lean towards Silent Disaster's shocking advancement theory. Perhaps the Nightmare Lord had realized this possibility earlier than it did, which was why she decided to enter the realm of mind to seek the answer. After all, the rate at which humans evolved was just too fast. After all, Osruk's report did not contain any information about the Iron Bird. If they had such a weapon back then, there was no reason for them to hide it until now. The only explanation was that, in less than a year's time, the changes of the human race had almost spread from the ground to the sky. Such a huge change could only be explained by leveling up. Once males could also become the main force of war, humanity's combat potential would undoubtedly increase greatly. Perhaps this was the true warning contained in Osruk's final message. Fortunately, compared to fire, Haxord was much more familiar with the sky, and the iron bird created by the other party was not much stronger than the devil beasts. As long as it was here, the sky would not allow anyone else to touch it. The attack this time would not suffer a setback like the last time. This confidence was by no means contempt. At this point, it would be foolish to underestimate the enemy. Its confidence came from its name. Because it was the ruler of the sky. After passing through the door, Sky Lord had already appeared at the edge of the island. Along with him was the parasitic eye demon. If eye demons were a rare species, then the parasitic eye demon was an even rarer and precious resource. This technology was inspired by the underground civilization. It required the sacrifice of an ascended person to fuse with the eye demon. Once it succeeded, the former would become an empty shell that contained the soul, while the latter would gain the ability to move freely. Despite the high price, Haxord did not hesitate to send it to the front lines and let it follow him. This was the only way to restrain the other important target that Osruk had mentioned, a witch who could attack from an extremely long distance. Even when it landed on the island, the image of the witch did not appear in its mind. This meant that the only opponent that could threaten it was not on the island. At the same time, it did not notice anyone looking in its direction. There was no better time than now. Haxord did not hesitate any longer and decisively opened the complete form of the distortion door. A large black hole opened up behind him and quickly extended to a width of dozens of steps. Any natural defenses became meaningless in front of this door. Red mist gushed out, and the high-ascended Siaces was the first to appear in front of him. "My lord, your troops are ready. Pass down my orders. Seize this island and kill all those who resist." "As you wish." Siaces let out a shrill cry. As a psionic warlock who had experienced 3 ascension ceremonies, this cry was enough to make any human who did not wear a god's stone collapse on the spot. Even if they did, they would fall into a trance from the mental attack. At the same time, it was also a signal to attack. After the cry, a large number of primal demons and symbiotic demons swarmed out of the distortion door and pounced towards the center of the island. The strength of the humans' fire crossbows lay in their extremely long range. As long as they could close the distance, these new symbiotic demons would definitely be able to break through the enemy's defenses. Soon, the vanguard troops crossed the outer perimeter of the island and approached the human town. However, there was no sound of gunfire. This caused Haxord to feel a little surprised. It had not been easy to place the enemy on the same level as the race. What was with this oversight? Could it be that they still did not realize that their position had been invaded? "My lord." After a quarter of an hour, Siaces hurried back. "The inner city has been occupied, but we did not discover any traces of humans. It's already an empty city." "What did you say?" Haxord stared. "There are still many unfinished buildings in the city. From the looks of it, they seem to have been erected not too long ago. I'm afraid they abandoned Archduke Island a day or 2 ago." So, the ships that the Sentinels had observed were not transporting troops to the island, but were instead speeding up the evacuation? But, how was this possible? The humans' actions were as if they knew that he was about to attack Archduke Island. The problem was that he had deliberately ordered his army to avoid all the towns and cities, and every route of advance had been inspected by demons. The ones who were most likely to leak information were the human laborers. He had even ordered his subordinates to concentrate on watching over them, cutting off all possibility of communication with the outside world. Even if the other party had noticed something was wrong, they should not have retreated so quickly. How did the news leak out? Before he could properly ponder this question, a deafening explosion suddenly erupted in the center of the island. In an instant, the entire ground shook violently. Chapter 13-14. Haxord closed the distortion door with a livid expression. Even the stupidest person would have no doubt that they had been completely tricked by the humans. "These worms!" Siaces roared furiously. The frantically wriggling whiskers on his cheeks betrayed the murderous intent in his heart. "Shut up!" Haxord interrupted him. "If they are worms, then what are we, who were tricked by the worms? From today onwards, I don't want to hear the term worm ever again." He then leaped up and flew towards the other end of Archduke Island. The thick black smoke continued to billow upwards, forming an extremely thick pillar of smoke. Below it, there were faint flashes of fire, as though magma was spewing out from underground. The city was in a mess. Even in places that were not affected by the fireball, there were many primal demons lying around. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. But this was not his focus, the truth had already happened. Staying here would not reduce the losses and would only increase his anger. If he had the time, he might as well make the enemy pay a higher price. On the south side of the island, Sky Lord indeed saw a few ships that had not gone far. Even though they had their sails up, they were basically motionless in front of his ability. Just as it was about to cross this distance in one step, a flash of light below attracted its attention. He saw a figure flying out from the periphery of Archduke Island and quickly heading south. So that was it. He thought that the person who ignited the flames had died along with the vanguard. He did not expect that the humans were planning to retreat. Letting the witches carry out the detonation mission and then easily retreat from the battlefield? How could it be so simple? Sky Lord immediately changed his target. He opened a distortion door and instantly appeared before the witches. It was a female with short light blonde hair. Her face instantly revealed a look of surprise, as though she did not expect him to suddenly appear. Haxord did not want to say anything else. He directly reached out to grab her, but his grab did not touch anything. The female in front of him suddenly burst forth with unbelievable speed. In the blink of an eye, she was already hundreds of feet away. At the same time, the air she stirred up slammed into Haxord and the parasitic eye demons like a wall. For a moment, the magic barrier glistened, and the ripples only subsided after a while. The witch slowed down after flying for a distance, as if she had consumed a lot of energy. It snorted coldly and gave chase again. It was another step away. This time, when it stepped out of the distortion door, the other party had already flown far away, leaving a trail of white fog behind him. Haxord was enraged and used its ability for the third time. This time, it directly positioned the door 1,000 feet in front of her, wanting to see where she would run to this time. However, the moment it stepped out of the door, it suddenly felt a large number of eyes focused on it. It was as if it had suddenly arrived at the center of the city from an empty place. Sky Lord was taken aback as he looked towards the source of the gazes. He saw black figures approaching from the direction of the sea line and land. Among them were iron birds and witches. Was this a premeditated ambush? So she was purposely stopping to make me think that she was limited by magic power and could only fly for a short period of time? Ha! Humans! Ha ha ha! Haxord was so angry that it laughed. Not only had they schemed against its army, but they were also preparing to scheme against it. If it retreated now, it would only take a single thought. But it did not do so. Yes, it was not a magic slayer. This was something it had always taken to heart. But that did not mean that a male wearing a god's stone of retaliation could surpass a senior lord. It wanted to let the other party know who was the true ruler of the sky. In the blink of an eye, 8 iron birds were already in front of it, their heads spewing a series of flames. Haxord waved one hand and opened a distortion door in front of him, swallowing the iron crossbows. At the same time, he opened the other side of the door beside the iron birds. After the fatal crossbows passed through the door, they swept straight to where they came from. In an instant, several iron birds were hit, and the formation was thrown into chaos. But what surprised him was that the iron crossbows, which were supposed to be fatal, did not cause the iron birds to fall apart on the spot. Instead, they only left a few holes in their bodies. Sky Lord quickly put this surprise to the back of his mind. He took a step up high and trampled the entire battlefield beneath his feet. The iron birds were clearly unable to keep up with his figure. Even though they began to climb upwards, their clumsy movements were even slower than worms. Just as he was about to tear them apart one by one, a passing bird suddenly transformed into a devil beast and bit at him. The eye demon did not treat the common birds on the sea as a threat at all. Haxord quickly dodged the sneak attack. He opened his palm angrily, and a black light immediately appeared between the two of them. It was also a distortion door, but it was only as wide as a finger. The part of his body that passed through the door would obviously not be left with the rest of his body. As if realizing that a great disaster was imminent, the devil beast shrank back into a seabird in the blink of an eye. But it was obviously difficult to stop in such a short distance. Half of her wing still brushed past the black line, and the wing tip and feathers that were cut off instantly blossomed like snowflakes. But before he could deliver the final blow, a rumbling sound rang out again. The blonde witch transformed into a dazzling golden light and charged straight at him. Haxord, who did not have time to repeat the same trick, could only muster all the magic power in his body and transform it into a strong shield that covered his entire body. Bang! The two crashed into each other, and the huge impact caused the golden light on the witch's body to explode into countless fragments. It also made Haxord feel suffocated. But the witch's injuries were obviously more serious. Not only was there blood at the corner of her mouth, but one of her arms was also broken into several pieces. But the witch completely disregarded her injuries. Her other remaining hand had already pulled out a short fire stick from her waist. Damn it! He had no choice but to open another distortion door. If the witch shot at him, the iron crossbow would only hit her partner. But what made Haxord anxious was that this attack was only a feint. The witch did not fire at him, but instead accelerated downwards and hugged the falling seabird. "I'm going to grind all of you into powder." Haxord roared for the first time since the start of the battle. But just at this moment, the sharpest warning sounded in Sky Lord's mind. It came from a large iron bird that descended from the clouds. In the Eye Demon's vision, the source was the witch that Osruk had mentioned. Haxord felt himself being locked by something. With a heightened sense of danger, Haxord expanded the distortion door to its maximum size, covering the witch's entire attack range. But the parasitic Eye Demon pushed him hard. Then there was a flash of fire. After what seemed like a long time, but also like a short moment, a black shadow flashed past like lightning. Countless cracks appeared on the distortion door, and then it shattered like glass. Then it was the parasitic Eye Demon who pushed him away. The blue light on his body flickered and extinguished. Blood, flesh, and organs spurted out, raising a blue mist amidst the falling snow. Both happened almost at the same time, so fast that Haxord could not react at all. Finally, it was his turn. Even though the attacking god's stone had been shattered, it still cut off half of his palm and left a few dents on his armor. The disorder of magic caused him to lose control of his body, and he fell straight towards the sea. At this moment, the iron birds had already turned around and were pouncing towards him. After escaping from the anti-magic zone, Haxord used the last of his strength to open a new door beneath him. Chapter 13-15. My lord. When Siasses saw Sky Lord again, he could not believe his eyes. He was dripping wet, as if he had just been fished out of the water. He looked extremely exhausted, and there were wounds all over his body. Half of his armor was stained with blue blood, as if he had just gone through a fierce battle. The parasitic Eye Demon that followed the Grand Lord was nowhere to be found. As the most sensitive sentinel, it was only useful when it was beside a Grand Lord. The current situation could only mean that the Eye Demon had most likely met with misfortune. If the opponent was from the Sky-Sea realm, such a scene could be understood, but the opponent was clearly those insects, humans. Haxord was in no mood to explain. He grabbed his subordinate and dragged him into the distortion door. The next moment, they were back in the red mist zone. Lord Sky Lord, the warriors on the island, Siasses quickly reacted, and his expression changed. Although the sudden explosion in the city had caused the vanguard to suffer heavy losses, at least a portion of them had survived. Their departure was equivalent to abandoning all of them on Archduke Island. Furthermore, there was a limit to the amount of red mist the vanguard could carry, and they would not last more than a few days. I can no longer open a new door. Haxord's words caused the high-ranked psionic warlock to shut his mouth. At any time, the value of a primal demon was far inferior to a Grand Lord. Given the two evils, there was no need to think too much about the choice. I will escort you back to Sky City. Inform Totolok first. Let the humans use sailboats to bring back the vanguard on the island. Bring as many as you can. As for the symbiotic demons, let them hide where they are. Sky Lord gritted his teeth. Once the red mist covers Archduke Island, the main force will immediately launch an attack on Sedimentation Bay and other places. The two of you will be in charge of the battle. My lord, isn't this a little too hasty? Siasses asked in surprise. It won't be too late to attack after you recover from your injuries. This is my order, you don't have to say anything else. Yes, I've overstepped. He hurriedly lowered his head. As you wish. Watching his subordinate leave, Haxord clenched his remaining hand tightly. How could he not know that this was a little hasty? However, it was better than letting the humans drag things out. For the first time, the Sky Lord realized that time was not on their side. The speed at which the humans absorbed the inheritance was faster than he had imagined. Within a year, the humans could threaten a senior lord with just a few witches and magicless males. What would happen in a few years? They could not give the humans any chance to breathe. The Western Front must be back on track. Several days later, Haxord finally returned to the bottom of the Great Rift Valley. Currently, this place was filled with dense red mist. Just by staying here, he could feel his spirit improving, and the pain from his palms had lessened significantly. It went straight to the red mist pond at the bottom of the birth tower. Looking at the motionless Nightmare Lord, the Sky Lord was instantly infuriated. If she had not been immersed in the realm of mind, he would not have ended up in such a sorry state. Everything should not have turned out this way. If he had focused on relocating his troops, the advancement of the front line would not have been so slow. If the Nightmare Lord had led the troops to fight, none of the Grey Castle soldiers would have been able to escape the northern lands. Then, while the humans were panicking, he would launch a frontal attack. At the same time, he would lead the troops from the west to attack the Hermes Plateau. This was the Western Front's strategy. Although he was angry, when it came to pulling the Nightmare Lord out of the realm of mind, Haxord revealed a look of hesitation. After all, the Nightmare Lord was an existence that he could only look up to in the past. In fact, he had once thought that the Nightmare Lord would become the king of his race. No. Haxord shook his head. He was loyal to the king, but this was just an ignorant thought he had when he participated in the promotion ceremony. In terms of level, the Nightmare Lord was essentially no different from him. At most, he would have a deeper understanding of the realm of mind. He made up his mind. This might hurt the Nightmare Lord's memory, and it might cause him to go into a rage of thunder. It might even cut off the clues to the mystery of the humans' promotion, but that was not as important as the war on the Western Front. At most, he would stand on Silent Disaster's side during the Holy See meeting and admit to the promotion theory. As for where the legacy shard came from, he could research it after the victory. As long as he could devour the humans' legacy shard, then everything they had now would become a stepping stone for their race. With this in mind, Haxord took a deep breath and suddenly pushed the Nightmare Lord. The magic in his palm would break the connection between the Nightmare Lord and the realm of mind, pulling it out of the origin of magic. In theory, that was the case. However, the Nightmare Lord did not open its eyes. Its body fell to the side like an empty shell in the red mist pond. Haxord instantly felt fear choking his throat. Even when its consciousness was almost destroyed by the uncontrollable magic during the promotion ceremony, or when it was ambushed by the Sky Sea realm, it had never been so frightened. He took a step forward and helped the Nightmare Lord up. He tried to capture its consciousness, but all he got was emptiness. Life did not end, but eternal slumber. This was the characteristic of being lost in the realm of mind. And once one sank into the endless Red Sea, there was no possibility of returning. Even if one could maintain a moment of lucidity, it would sooner or later be eroded by the chaotic consciousness until it became a part of the realm of mind. Sky Lord's heart immediately sank to the bottom. This meant that they had lost the Nightmare Lord. How did this happen? With the Nightmare Lord's ability, as long as it acted cautiously and did not make any mistakes, it should not have been trapped in the realm of mind. What exactly did it encounter during its exploration? Sky Lord did not dare to think any further. He got up and ran to the top of the tower, even throwing his injuries to the back of his mind. He had to inform the king of this news immediately. The situation on the Western Front had changed drastically. How's everyone's recovery? In the command post at Cage Mountain, Iron Axe looked at Agatha and asked with concern. With Nana around, what problem can there be? The latter put away the sigil of listening and shook her head with a smile. It was obvious that she was in a good mood. According to Vendi, Maggie recovered to the extent of being alive and kicking on the same day, while Lightning only recovered the next day. Both of them have now resumed patrolling the front lines. The only regret is that I did not participate in this ambush. We were taking a risk after all. Besides, in order to carry that giant flintlock, even the seats on the Seagull were completely dismantled, not to mention carrying an extra person. Iron Axe also smiled. I thought your regret would be not being able to kill that senior demon in one fell swoop. To be able to defeat a senior lord with such a lineup is already an impressive victory. Agatha turned to the Pearl of the Northern region and placed her hand on her chest. I underestimated you in the past, and reality has proven that it was indeed a mistake. Other than His Majesty, there are many outstanding people among the magicless ones who should not be underestimated. Edith accepted the bow calmly. As the person who planned the entire ambush, she didn't need to show any modesty at this time. Chapter 13:16. As a senior demon lord, the Sky Lord's abilities were indeed astonishing. Using magic power to open up a spatial passageway could allow him to move quickly and could also be used as a shield or weapon. However, upon careful analysis, one would realize that it wasn't flawless. First, we can confirm that this senior demon can only open one passage at a time, and the entrance is within its reach. Edith said, "It's hard to determine the limit of the other side, but it should be at least 2 kilometers. It sounds like an enhanced version of trajectory." After interacting with Roland for a long time, Agatha had also learned many strange terms from him, such as enhanced version, special enhanced version, enhanced version, and so on, just based on the distance. That is indeed the case. The Pearl of the Northern Region nodded. However, the number of passageways created by the trajectory depends on the amount of magic power. As for Sky Lord, he has to close the previous passageway before he can open a new one. The situation at the time was so urgent that it couldn't possibly hide anything. This is very important because it determines our basic response. If the enemy can use more than one passage at the same time, the situation will become 100 times more complicated. After the two of them digested the information, she continued, "Another key point is that although the entrance and exit of the passage can be scaled freely, Haxord must stand near the door to maintain its existence." According to Miss Sylvie's observation, when the Archduke Island exploded, it took a few seconds to close the gate before flying to the south of the island. This means that, the wider the door is opened, the slower it will close? Iron Axe said thoughtfully. Very likely so. Edith spread out her hands and said, "And the last point is its Achilles heel. Haxord is not a magic slayer, so he can neither restrain the witches nor pose a threat to those who wear God's stones of retaliation. Even though its body was not weaker than an extraordinaire's, it would still be trapped in the anti-magic domain if it fought in close combat. I don't think it would be willing to exchange its life for 2 or 3 humans." At this point, she paused. In summary, the Sky Lord's main ability is to open up a 2-way passageway with him as the center and a radius of several kilometers. Furthermore, only one passageway is allowed to exist at a time. Whether it's the front or the back, as long as both sides of the door are affected by the God's stone, the passage will collapse. So, if it appears again, our response plan is, if it's at the outer edge of the camp, and the exit of the door isn't facing the camp, just let Miss Sylvie direct the artillery to cover it. Edith said methodically, if the exit of the door is inside the encampment, or if it directly uses the small door to rush into the encampment of the First Army, the soldiers don't have to do anything. Just leave it to the professionals. Nothing. Iron Axe was a little surprised at first, and then he said, "I see. That's right." Edith smiled. In fact, the Sky Lord's most effective method of attack is to use our firearms to kill ourselves. Once the soldiers are able to hold back, its threat to the position will be limited. As I said before, this ability is almost irreplaceable for strategic deployment, but it is not a good choice for attacking. Faced with the First Army's front line that ignored it, the senior demon lord couldn't possibly charge into the trenches and engage in close combat with the soldiers. If that happened, when the professionals, the heavily armored God's punishment witches, arrived, it would only be a dead end. What if the First Army uses the gap between the artillery attacks to counterattack? Agatha asked after a moment of silence. For example, it first opens a passage to the outside, making us think that it's transporting troops. But after firing the cannons, it opens a new door, aiming the exit at the encampment. This way, we might be attacked by our own cannons. The fact that she could think of this was enough to prove that the Ice Witch had put a lot of effort into Greycastle's new weapon. This is indeed a feasible method in theory, but I don't think the Sky Lord will do that, Edith explained. A door that allows a single person to pass through can be completed in the blink of an eye, but it will take time to expand it to a huge door that can completely protect him. The time difference between the two is extremely limited, and if he fails, he will be blasted into smithereens by the artillery shells that fall behind him. For a senior demon lord, this is too risky. All in all, I can understand that the Sky Lord's threat to the front line isn't as great as previously thought, right? Iron Axe said while stroking his chin. That's the General Staff's current conclusion. Edith gave an affirmative answer. Of course, this is only if Haxord is leading the troops in battle alone. If there are other senior demons cooperating with him, the danger level will instantly increase by several times. For example, leading Osrook directly to the center of the encampment. Iron Axe and Agatha could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the latter had already died on the fertile plains. But we can't rule out the possibility of a new magic slayer appearing, so if possible, it's best to find a chance to get rid of this trouble. The Pearl of the Northern Region's tone carried a hint of murderous intent. Only when he completely disappears can he truly be considered a threat. Hearing this, Agatha could not help but feel a little emotional. A mortal not only had no fear of demons, but was also plotting a way to kill a senior demon lord. In the past, this would have sounded like a fantasy, but now, no one found it strange, as if it was a matter of course. Humans had indeed changed a lot in the past 400 years. Be it humans or objects. Perhaps the Union's silence was not all bad. At least they did not carry on the fear of powerful enemies from that era to this era. Now that she thought about it, there might have been many ordinary people who had the same potential as Edith Kant during the Union's era. It was just that the pessimism and fear that spread throughout the race had shackled their thoughts and wills. Coupled with the deliberate estrangement created by the upper echelons, that era as a whole seemed gloomy. And this time, before humans tasted true despair, Roland Wimbledon stopped it from spreading. As her emotions surged, she once again recalled the scene when she first met Roland when she woke up from her long slumber in the ice coffin. Everything started from the sentence, "Even mortals can defeat demons." Haxord probably won't fall for the same trap twice. Do you have any good ideas? Iron Axe asked. As long as the First Army is agile enough, even without setting up a trap, they can still find an opportunity to kill the other party, for example, equipping the Fire of Heaven with a large caliber weapon that can shoot God's stones. That's true. The commander-in-chief muttered. But that requires a lot of God's stone bullets. Have you already thought of a way to process God's stones? Impossible. Ah. Edith shrugged. I'm just a chief of staff, not a god. It's fine to give suggestions, but as for how to implement it, I'll naturally leave it to His Majesty to figure out. Don't worry, I've written all these things in the battle report. In order for the front lines to achieve victory, he should also do his best. The other two could not help but twitch the corners of their mouths. Chapter 13-17. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. 2 days later, Roland received a report on the battle on Archduke Island and the situation in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Compared to the previous time when it took a week to send a letter from Evernight City in the northern region to Neverwinter, this speed was a huge improvement. Regardless of whether it was the short-distance express delivery of air messengers or the long-distance travel of steam ships day and night, they were now all part of the information transmission system. Every important message would be sent by a special person, a special ship, or even a plane, and this time, the report was sent by Tilly. Thank you for your hard work. Roland handed her a chaos drink. How's the situation over there? Won't you know after reading the report? Tilly took the cup and glanced at him. You're so attentive. Why are you feeling guilty? Is it because you still don't have a clue about my dedicated computer? Pfft. Nightingale's stifled laughter came from behind him. How could that be? I've already chosen the most suitable one from several plans. As soon as Anna has time, we can start the trial production immediately. Roland hurriedly said, you know, several projects have reached the most critical stage recently. She's really too busy. For Anna's sake, I won't argue with you this time, brother. Tilly drank the drink in one gulp, wiped her mouth, and walked out of the office. The seagull will be returning soon. I'll return to the Air Knight Academy first. Not even for a day. Roland was slightly surprised. I have no choice. Right now, the only things that can threaten the Sky Lord are the Seagull and Andrea. Also, I don't want to miss any opportunity for revenge. Tilly waved her hand with her back facing him. Then I'll be going, brother. Looking at the closed door, Nightingale sighed softly. Everyone is working hard. If possible, I would rather they work hard in other areas than war. This thought emerged in Roland's mind, but he did not say it out loud. Before the end of the Battle of Divine Will, before the fate of mankind was decided, no one could rest from this heavy burden. There was no point in saying this now, other than avoiding responsibility. After a moment of silence, he broke the seal on the report. After reading all the reports, Roland finally understood what Tilly meant. Edith Kant and Andrea were undoubtedly the greatest heroes of this battle, being able to issue the order to retreat in time and successfully ambush a Grand Lord that came and went without a trace on the vast sea. But at the same time, the sender of that crucial intelligence couldn't be ignored. Without this person's desperate move, they wouldn't have been able to win. What do you plan to do? This matter had obviously attracted Nightingale's attention. Regardless of the original intention of sending this secret letter, this person's name and achievements shouldn't be forgotten, Roland said in a deep voice. If it was in his previous life, it would have been almost impossible to find an unknown spy after the long war. The only thing that could be left on the tombstone was an inscription that read, "No one knows your name, but your achievements will last forever." However, witches could change this unavoidable situation and let every soldier who contributed to the fate of mankind leave their name in the long river of history. When the kingdom of Everwinter is under the control of the First Army again, let Black Money cooperate with Summer to confirm his identity and origin. If the murderer who killed him was still alive at that time, he would definitely not be able to escape the severe punishment of the law. Nightingale nodded. It would be great if the equipment that you mentioned could be manufactured earlier to allow communication across thousands of miles. Unfortunately, that's not my forte. Roland could not help but rub his forehead. Whenever he thought of the circuit diagram that he had forcibly memorized, he felt an incomparable headache. Now you can finally understand how I felt during the exam, Nightingale said while covering her mouth. But no matter how difficult it is, I won't fall asleep on the table like someone and hand in a blank paper in the end. Roland glared at her. In fact, I've almost completed the manufacturing of the prototype. That's right. Although the progress was extremely slow, the radio project had never stopped. Like the piston engine, after considering many plans from the design bureau of Greycastle, he decided to choose two of them to work on at the same time. These two were the spark transmitter and the amplitude modulation transmitter. The former was the ancestor of radio communication. Its structure was extremely simple and did not have any electronic components. It only used the voltage transformer coil to increase the voltage to charge the capacitor until the voltage between the spark gap of the capacitor was high enough to break through the air and release electric sparks. This part was quite similar to a lighter, except that the electric current transmitted by the spark was not wasted. Instead, it repeatedly oscillated between the capacitor and the inductor, producing electromagnetic waves that were finally transmitted through the antenna. In other words, as long as the power was switched on and off, it could emit intermittent electromagnetic waves. The listener could translate it into the corresponding signal based on the length of the sound. This was the origin of the long and short telegraph codes. Although it still sounded a bit confusing, Roland used the most ingenious method, which was to first let the design bureau of Greycastle's wireless project team use readily available materials to build a usable real thing, and then copy the real thing. For example, 2 pieces of tin foil were clamped on a stack of oiled paper, and then sealed with wax, which was a simple high-voltage capacitor. The inductor was even simpler. It was nothing more than wrapping a coil of wire around an insulating tube. Without considering mass production or specifications, Roland could complete the equipment by himself. Although compared to the sealed industrial products that were only the size of a fingernail, they looked thick and crude, the effect was basically the same. When the transmission tower was built, he could attempt the first wireless transmission experiment of this era. However, the shortcomings of the spark transmitter were also very obvious. Even if it passed the test, to be put into official use, he still had to design a set of code that matched the kingdom's language. The training of the transmitter and receiver would also take a lot of time. In addition, the spectrum of the spark transmitter was extremely wide, and only one transmitter could work in the same range. It was not suitable for frontline intelligence personnel to use. Therefore, his ultimate goal was still the amplitude modulation transmitter that used electron tubes to amplify the signal. And the biggest advantage of the latter was that it could directly transmit voice signals. In principle, radio communication and telephone were essentially very similar. They both converted the vibration of sound into electric current or electromagnetic wave changes, and after long-distance transmission to the other end, it was converted back into sound. However, the frequency of the human voice was too low, causing the wavelength of the signal to be too long. The longer the wavelength, the larger the size of the antenna needed. If the voice signal was directly transmitted, the antenna length would probably be more than 100 kilometers, which was impossible in engineering. Therefore, if he wanted to transmit the voice, he had to ride on a carrier with a higher frequency. This was the so-called modulation. After the new waveform of the two was accepted, the receiver also had to use a series of demodulation methods to filter out the high-frequency waves, leaving only the meaningful low-frequency waves, which could be converted into the final voice. Once the amplitude modulation transmitter was successful, both the First Army and the intelligence agency would truly have the ability to communicate in real time. Chapter 13:18. Of course, the difficulty of the two types of wireless communication equipment was not on the same level. At least, the core component of the latter, the electron tube, was still being trial-produced by the Ministry of Engineering. The failed products had already piled up into a small hill outside the laboratory. As for the proposal to modify the fire of heaven, mentioned in Edith's report, Roland was rather tempted. From a technical point of view, it was not difficult to transplant a 35mm sniper cannon onto a biplane. All he had to do was bury the entire cannon under the belly of the plane and remove the shooter's seat. If the number of bullets was limited to 10, a balance could be achieved in terms of weight, and there was no need to make any other changes. The problem was that to obtain large God's stone bullets, he had to use the blood of witches or demons to dissolve and separate the God's stone vein until he obtained a God's stone of retaliation of appropriate size and shape. Only then could he proceed with further processing. If it was too big, the existing knives and lathes would be useless. If it was too small, the God's stone would be too brittle. The process of selecting the base material would consume a lot of magic blood. Even if the witch union and sleeping spell supported his idea, the amount would not be enough to satisfy the needs of the war. To truly solve this problem, he had to think of a solution from the demons. First, he had to find out how they could process large God's stone pillars. Second, he had to use their blood to create them. Now that the fire of heaven could return to Neverwinter from the front line within a day, coupled with Agatha's refrigeration ability, it was not impossible to directly transport fresh demon blood from the battlefield. Roland silently recorded the proposal on the agenda. At night, he entered the dream world as usual. In order to speed up the progress of the Greycastle Design Bureau's project, Roland had greatly increased the number of times he entered the dream world in the past month. This caused the dream world, which was originally lagging behind the real world, to catch up. The city, which was previously in late summer and early autumn, was now covered in snowflakes. It was as if this and the outside world were just different regions of the same world. The tube-shaped apartment district was still busy in the morning. The expansion of the erosion and the destruction of the Prism City did not affect the residents at all. Breakfast stalls were still on both sides of the streets. People hurriedly walked through the streets, and the snow that had accumulated overnight was already covered with footprints. Even though Mist claimed that this world was also facing a battle of divine will, it was undoubtedly much more peaceful than the battlefield in the kingdom of Wolfheart that was filled with red mist. In addition, the long period of time in the dream did not only bring about the change of seasons, but also the mental state of the demon transmigrator. After a period of surveillance and observation, Roland could basically confirm that the demon who called herself Valkyries was not a native of the Kargard Peninsula. Although the Martialist Association verified that there was indeed such a person among the visiting group from the peninsula, her behavior could not be explained with common sense. Roland was no stranger to the phenomenon of his true identity changing internally, because he himself was an example. Using the word transmigrator to describe him was undoubtedly the most appropriate way of describing him. In the beginning, Valkyries was still able to maintain her disguise, or rather, act like an ordinary martialist, such as flipping through various books and not speaking as much as possible. But as time passed, she gradually became more and more impatient. Especially after her injuries healed, she sneaked into the depths of the Prism City and stood in front of the erosion breach in silence. According to Donnan's report, at that time, Valkyries' face showed obvious anxiety, as if she was longing for something. She even thought several times that Valkyries was about to jump into the erosion breach, but in the end, she restrained herself. It would be too far-fetched to say that she was mourning the death of her companions, because Valkyries did not even stay at the place where the visiting group had been killed. She had come for the erosion breach from the very beginning. It was not difficult to understand the change in her mentality if she were in Roland's shoes. Coming from the city of demons to this completely unfamiliar modern city, he might have been able to remain calm at first, wanting to figure out where exactly this place was. However, as time dragged on, and the hope of returning was still slim, anxiety was unavoidable. Perhaps the real reason Valkyrie sneaked into the Prism City was to see if she could return to the world she was familiar with through the breach. Unfortunately, the memory fragments did not go as she wished. In any case, it was extremely difficult to disguise herself to this extent. After all, Valkyries did not know that her every move was being watched by Donnan. If it were not for these private details, Roland would have thought that her disguise was almost flawless based on her communication with other martialists. Roland knew that if he were in Valkyrie's shoes, he would never be able to do this. Now that Valkyrie's identity had been confirmed, the next step was how to deal with it. At this time, he received a text message on his cell phone. It was from Phyllis. "Your Majesty, everyone is ready." Roland put his cell phone into his pocket, stood up, and walked into the living room. Zero was busy putting egg noodles on the table. Seeing Roland, she put her hands on her hips and said, "Uncle, you haven't forgotten what you promised me, have you?" "Why? Are you afraid that I'll sneak away?" "It's not the first time you've done that," she said with a pout. "Don't worry, I won't this time." Roland walked up to her with a smile and patted her head. "Let's have breakfast first. After that, we'll call Sister Garcia next door and then we'll set off together." Apart from the Spring Festival, the most popular event this winter was the quadrennial martial arts contest. For all the junior and senior high school students in the city, anyone who could go to watch the contest would definitely become the center of attention. Zero, who was not very interested in this kind of competition, was not immune to it. After a lot of begging, Roland had no choice but to agree to take her to experience it up close after the winter vacation. Considering that today's contest was under the watch of the Guardian and was in the round-robin stage, it was unlikely that a fallen evil would appear. Besides, Zero had to return to her hometown during the long holidays. As the little girl's only request, Roland could not refuse. Moreover, it would be more convenient for him to act with her. Roland decided to face the demon traveler. It was already the 4th month. Valkyries seemed to be staring at the noisy arena, but his mind was not on it at all. 4 months had given it a basic understanding of this world, and it had also allowed it to learn about the various legacies of humans. In a sense, it had also become a part of the inheritors. As long as he could return to the real world, he would definitely be able to benefit his race greatly. However, the most fatal problem was that he still could not find a way to leave the realm of mind. Valkyries had a lot of important information, but there was no one to pass it on to. It was like finding a bottle of spring water in the desert with great difficulty, only to find that the bottle was sealed shut. Whether it was sending out a call for help to Haxord or trying to sense the traces of the king, he could not get any response. Even when he was meditating at the opening of the realm of mind did not respond to his call. This was the first time he encountered such a situation. Valkyries could not help but hate the Sky Lord. Chapter 13:19. If everything went smoothly on the western front, the red mist should have already crossed the ridge of the continent and infiltrated the human territory. This meant that the birth tower in the Great Rift Valley was no longer a secret. No matter how slow the opponent was, they should have realized it. But why was Haxord still indifferent? Could it be that the humans were so weak that it could deal with them alone? Valkyries felt that it was impossible. If the opponent was so weak, Osruk would not have been defeated on the fertile plains. It knew that the long isolation had caused it to lose the ability to judge the situation. This experience made the Nightmare Lord feel extremely uneasy. And that human, it looked at the other end of the arena and saw Roland accompanying two females, watching the competition with interest. Damn it! Didn't he have something important to do? If he had a way to leave this place, then it might be its only chance. The inheritance and knowledge of the humans were undoubtedly brought out of this world by him. He must have some kind of communication channel with the outside world. As long as he left the realm of mind, it would have a chance to seize that opportunity. After all, in the king's presiding Holy See, it had sensed the connection between the king and the territory many times. It was also because of this ability that it dared to follow the fluctuations of the inheritance shard and search for traces of Roland in the depths of the realm of mind. However, the other party had always been active in this world and did not give it any chance to take advantage of him. Could the human king be so idle that he did not care about politics for a few months? He would rather waste time on the meaningless martial arts tournament than read a few books. The only explanation was that there was too little pressure on the front line. So this was still Haxord's fault. Just as its emotions were fluctuating, Valkyries suddenly noticed that Roland had left the two and walked to a corner alone. There was a hooded female standing there, as if she was deliberately waiting for him. She pretended to be indifferent as she walked out of the crowd, but her eyes were fixed on Roland. After a brief conversation, the female pointed in the direction of the exit. Roland seemed to be a little hesitant, but finally nodded. Did the association discover something? Valkyries had planned to stop there, but for some reason, it felt that the female had a familiar aura. It was precisely this strange feeling that made it take a few more steps forward and take a closer look. It was this one glance that made Valkyries' hair stand on end. Under the dim light, it saw a face similar to Heftali's, or rather, the Martialist Association's, Lon. Could it be that the Transformer had always been hiding in this world? And the reason why Roland could enter and exit this place as a male human was also because of it. This news was too shocking. Valkyries could no longer suppress the impulse in her heart and quickly followed. After passing through the safety passage, Roland and the suspected shapeshifter did not walk out of the arena. Instead, they turned and entered the underground garage. The King of Nightmares tried to lighten his footsteps and followed them from a distance until they entered a civil air defense refuge passage. When Valkyries followed them, she found that the passage was no more than 10 meters long and there were no forks in it. At the end of the passage was a closed concrete wall with the warning words, "Unfinished, no entry," hanging on it. It was a dead end, but the two of them had disappeared without a trace. Oh no, it's a trap. Valkyries reacted instantly, but it was too late. Before it could turn around and retreat, Roland had already appeared behind it, blocking the only way. And there were several females standing beside him. Seeing the way they used their abilities, which were completely different from martialists, Valkyries did not even have the slightest hope left. There was no doubt that the people standing beside him were all witches. Valkyries finally understood where the previous sense of familiarity came from. It was the subtle difference between the magic fluctuations and the force of nature. If witches could also come to this realm of consciousness and possess their original power, then it was only a matter of time before it was exposed. After all, if the other party could quietly hide so many people to set up an ambush, it would be a piece of cake for them to sneak around and spy on it. This principle could be understood with just a little thought. All of its camouflage was for surface contact, but it was just a joke in front of witches with strange abilities. Perhaps in the past 4 months, witches had already figured out its whereabouts. "We meet again, Miss Valkyries," Roland said calmly. Valkyries did not speak. Saying anything at this time would only bring disgrace to itself. Although it still could not understand why the other party could also let witches come to this realm, it was no longer important. The other party deliberately set up an ambush in this secluded place, and its purpose was self-evident. The only thing it could do now was to die in battle. The Nightmare Lord stirred up all the magic power in its body and leaned forward slightly. As for the possibility of winning against a group of combat witches without the ability of magic stones and the magic slaying skill, it did not even consider it. No matter what the situation was, it would not surrender to the enemy. "How about I buy you a cup of coffee from the Kargard Peninsula?" Roland said again. Valkyries almost sprained her foot. She froze on the spot, her upper body still in a slanted posture, looking rather stiff. What did you say?" "Buy you a cup of coffee." Roland repeated again. "Although it's not real coffee, but some kind of similar special drink." Valkyrie stared at him for a long time before she asked the question in her heart. Why? She could not figure out what this male was thinking at all. The reality was different from this place. The coexistence of the tribe and humans was just an illusion. Since the other party had confirmed its true origin, he would not let it go. If it did not meet death, it would only meet a fate worse than death. "Because some things are better to be open than to hide," Roland said slowly, "especially when the battle of divine will is not the final battle." The battle of divine will is not the final battle. Valkyries could not help but be stunned. She did not expect to hear this from the mouth of a human. After a long silence, she regained her vigilant posture. "Where do you want to talk?" "It's not far from here. We'll be there in a few minutes." Roland snapped his fingers, and the sound of a car engine came from behind. "Get in the car. I've already booked a seat." Roland did not lie to her. The chosen location was a high-end restaurant in a building. Sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window, she could see the silver-covered city skyline. Soft music floated in the hall, and the atmosphere was elegant and quiet. Valkyries knew that choosing this place to talk was also a show of sincerity. If she wanted to kill it, a public place with so many people was not a suitable place to execute her. Looking at the group of witches who were staring at her, she sat down and took a deep breath. "Why didn't you ask me to come here directly? That would be a waste of time. I don't think you'll admit it immediately. Before being forced into a desperate situation, people tend to be resistant and run away. It's simpler this way." Roland shrugged. "Since we have a preliminary consensus, let's quickly get to the point. It's good for both of us to be honest. I'm Roland Wimbledon, the King of Greycastle, and one of the creators of the Dream World." "What's your identity?" "One of the creators." Although Valkyries had already guessed that the other party was not a simple visitor, this identity still shocked Valkyries. It was the first time she heard that a domain in the realm of mind could be created by more than one person. But this might also be the reason why he could not completely control the domain like the king. Suppressing the urge to ask who the others were, the Nightmare Lord slowly replied, "Valkyries. That's my name. What about your title and level? For example, Sky Lord. You can give me more details." She paused for a moment. "Nightmare Lord, that's my title." Pfft. Chapter 13:20. "What's so strange about that?" Valkyrie said coldly. "Do you think anyone can enter the realm of mind? Or, are you proud of the fact that you've imprisoned a Grand Lord?" Obviously, even in a disadvantageous situation, Valkyries did not give up her pride. Roland even had a hunch that if he humiliated her too much, she would probably rush to the witch and beg for death. But this reply really surprised him. He had only casually asked about the title. After all, most senior demons had their own unique titles, and a person who could host a promotion ceremony in the City of Demons was definitely not a nobody. But he did not expect that this demon's origin was more complicated than he thought. Roland originally thought that Valkyrie's consciousness had accidentally escaped from the memory fragment, but now there was another possibility: Valkyries might come from the real world. The name, Nightmare, first appeared in Osruk's documents, and greeting her proved that she was not a historical figure but was still active among the high-level demons. Moreover, Roland had watched the memory fragment many times, and during this period, he did not hear the corresponding title of a Grand Lord. If the demon language he learned from Kabardabi was right, it meant that the host at that time had not become a Grand Lord yet. Combining this with the Pearl of the Northern Region's analysis of the situation at the front line, Roland was more and more inclined to the latter answer. In other words, Valkyries, who was sitting opposite him, had existed for at least 800 years, and her strength and knowledge were among the rarest of the demons. If Valkyries' abnormal reaction to Lan was taken into account, the time period could be even longer. The value of such a target was far greater than a soul copied from a memory fragment. Even if it didn't say anything, it was equivalent to eliminating a senior Lord-class devil for the front lines. Just this alone was significant. I have to correct you. First of all, I didn't imprison you. At least for now, you're free. Roland pretended to be calm and replied. Second, breaking into the dream world is your subjective behavior. I don't think I'm wrong. Valkyries was at a loss for words. After a long while, she sighed and said, You call this the dream world? Its pride made it unable to tolerate any humiliation, but at the same time, it was unable to make an unreasonable argument. This silence had already confirmed the origins of the Nightmare Lord. It had indeed come to this place through the realm of mind. Because every time I fall asleep, I will enter this place. In a sense, it is no different from a dream. Ridiculous. Valkyrie said in a low voice. Opening up a realm of consciousness required not only talent, but also a highly focused mind and an iron will. Only then would one not get lost in the sea of mana. But this non-magic level male could do it just by sleeping? Isn't this too unfair? Hello, this is what you ordered. Please enjoy. At this time, the waiter served the dishes. All kinds of pastries and drinks were quickly placed on the table. They looked quite delicious. That's the truth. After the waiter left, Roland spread his hands and said, As I said before, being honest is good for both of us. I won't lie to you about this. Besides, the above is not the main point. The main point is the truth about the battle of divine will, and the future of each race. He picked up his chopsticks and gestured for her to eat. We can talk about this while eating. Valkyries once again confirmed that this male was different from all the humans she had seen before. This was an important matter that involved the continuation of the race. There was no reason to talk about this while eating. If it were any other normal person, they would probably have become abnormally serious and acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. But he did not seem to be deliberately teasing her. It was as if to him, this was a normal thing to do. She picked up the muddy cup of Peninsula coffee and took a sip. Instantly, a fragrant and smooth taste slid down her throat. It was actually not bad. She did not know why, but she suddenly felt like she had lost. No, she had to take the initiative. Valkyries forced herself to put down the cup and asked in a low voice, Where did you hear that the Battle of Divine Will wasn't the final battle? Roland took out Lan's photo from his wallet and placed it on the table. You've seen her, right? As Lan's portrait had appeared in the video data left behind by the Reflection Church, he deduced that it was even older than the Union's establishment. Therefore, he deliberately made Ling look like Lan to see if the demon in the memory fragment would react. Although the truth was different from what he had expected, Valkyrie's shock at that time showed that she had indeed seen this woman. After a while, the Nightmare Lord nodded. Who is she? A traitorous oracle. Roland slowly recounted the secret conversation in the Rose Café. After listening to this incredible story, even Valkyries was stunned. Could it be that, the oracle that my mentor mentioned was also her? Mentor? Transformer Heathtullys. She taught me a lot of knowledge. After hesitating for a moment, Valkyries told him about the Cloud School's past. Her failure to advance also caused the unstable Cloud School to lose its last protective umbrella. So that's what happened. Roland suddenly understood. For the first time in history, the intelligence of the two races was put together. He felt that the missing piece of the puzzle in his mind was finally revealed. Your Majesty, did you think of anything? Phyllis asked. Do you remember the portrait hanging on the wall during the Union's Oath of the Three Kings? Roland took a deep breath. I'm afraid that the person in the portrait was this senior demon called Heathtallies. What did you say? The Union would worship the portrait of a demon? How is that possible? The Tequila Witches all looked incredulous. According to the influence of the Cloud School during the First Battle of Divine Will, it's not strange for such a situation to happen. Since a demon in the Cloud School could become a senior lord, it's normal for there to be witches or ordinary people from the Cloud School among the higher-ups. I guess before Heathtallies died, she always had doubts about the Battle of Divine Will, right? In the eyes of some people, this opinion was equivalent to siding with the humans. I can't deny that. Valkyries closed her eyes. She had a dispute with the current king, but the tide of the war can't be stopped by one or two people. Chapter 1321. Because you humans have short lifespans and forgetful. Valkyries seemed to have regained a sense of superiority and subconsciously picked up the cup of coffee. In just a few decades, history will be replaced by lies. Such a thing is almost unimaginable for my race, who have a long lifespan. You seem to have forgotten that no matter how comforting a lie is, it's still a lie. Same here, Roland retorted. Didn't you also deliberately ignore Heathtallies' warning? Apart from those who experienced it, I'm afraid none of the demons of the new generation know about this, right? Valkyries opened his mouth but could not say a word. In the end, he could only silently drink his coffee, which was equivalent to a tacit agreement. Let's make a guess. He pulled the topic back to the betrayal of the Oracle. Perhaps the blurry figure that Transformer saw 1,000 years ago was the same person as Lon in the dream world. Unfortunately, your mentor was unable to form a fixed domain in the realm of mind, so he did not receive a definite hint. You believe the Oracle's words? I believe what I saw. The enemies who claim to be servants of God are eroding this world, and in reality, we have indeed found the ruins left behind by past civilizations. I don't know where those victorious civilizations went, but the truth is that they have never returned. Don't you think it's strange? Perhaps there is a more beautiful world that is more suitable for an upgraded race to live in, such as the origin of magic? Roland said sarcastically. Upgrading is a path to godhood, but after becoming a god, you can't freely return to your hometown. What kind of god is that? And when you get close to the origin of magic, which is the erosion rift, will it really make you feel good and comfortable? If that's the case, you should have jumped in long ago. This guy really sent a witch to follow me all the way. Valkyries thought angrily, but he could not refute. When he stood in front of the Scarlet Rift, he only felt a strong sense of danger. Even so, what can you change? After a long silence, the Nightmare Lord said in a low voice, it's too late. If you were a member of the Cloud School, you might have a chance to turn the situation around 1,000 years ago. But when our race received the inheritance of the Third Civilization, the war was unstoppable. The Third Civilization was probably the underground civilization. Roland couldn't help but slow down his speech. The so-called inheritance, what exactly is it? Valkyrie stared blankly for a moment before chuckling. What? So you guys have never obtained any legacy shards? Answer His Majesty's question. Phyllis bellowed. We don't need any fragments. Your Majesty's knowledge is enough. Only a group of barbaric monsters like you would start a war over a stone. Just when Roland thought that the King of Nightmares would not answer his question, the King of Nightmares said, I will tell you. Then you will understand why it is impossible to turn the situation around. As long as a civilization has tasted the sweetness of inheritance, it will never forget the sweetness and will only desire more. It paused and looked at the witches beside Roland. You are the best examples. If you were to ask humans to give up all the changes brought about by the King of Grey Castle, would you be willing? What you mean is, that's right. The legacy shard is just one of the ways of inheritance. The King of Nightmare's words confirmed Roland's conjecture. You impart the new knowledge here to humans, which is equivalent to humans obtaining the inheritance of the dream world. But the effect of the fragment is more thorough and comprehensive. It doesn't target an individual, but the entire civilization. Following that, Valkyrie spoke of the road of integration that happened more than 100 years after the end of the first battle of divine will. It was an ultimate battle that the Union did not know about. You should also know that the third civilization once covered more than half of the continent. If our race occupied the Blackstone region, humans occupied the Land of Dawn, and the second civilization occupied the Sky Sea realm, then the third civilization was the master of the underground world. They were like earthworms. Their bodies were extremely weak, but they had a unique way of using magic power. Unfortunately, these fellows were unlucky and encountered something they shouldn't have. When they were digging holes in the mountains, they encountered a crack in the ground and directly penetrated from the Blackstone region to the Sky Sea realm. It doesn't matter if you don't understand. You just need to understand that they inadvertently opened the barrier between their nest and the Sky Sea realm. The latter took advantage of the situation and invaded the Blackstone region, killing the earthworms and forcing them to retreat. If we could lend them a helping hand, they might have a chance of survival. But to our race, it was also the best time to verify the rumors of the relic. Therefore, the king, who was still an ascendant, led a team to attack the fleeing second civilization from behind and trap them in the Ghost Valley. This place is located between two mountain peaks. Its surface area is about half the size of the fertile plains. There are underground rivers and strata on both sides that stretch for thousands of miles. The bottom of the valley varies greatly. One moment it was an underground cave, the next moment it could become an open hill. Even if the earthworms were good at digging holes, it would be difficult for them to completely conceal their tracks. This war lasted for nearly 10 years. The number of our race's primal demons that died here was more than the number of humans that died in the first battle of divine will. In the end, the king and the Sky Sea realm each obtained a portion of the inheritance fragment. Roland could not help but hold his breath. Even though he did not want to reveal his eagerness to let the other party be pleased, this piece of news made him momentarily forget to control his expression. And then... that's it. Huh. I'm talking about coffee. Valkyries licked her lips. You were the one who said that we should talk while eating, right? Roland was instantly speechless. Even at this stage, it was still trying to regain the initiative in the conversation. Should he say that the other party was too competitive or too arrogant? Nevertheless, he immediately called the waiter over and ordered 3 cups of Peninsula coffee. You may continue. The fusion wasn't that complicated. The king placed the stolen fragment and our race's inheritance fragment together. The two then merged into one. At that moment, we took over a portion of what the other party once had: language, knowledge, magic power, technology, and even life, the King of Nightmares said slowly. The earthworms that were still alive withered and died like weeds, and the power of our race also increased by leaps and bounds. Magic power seemed to have lifted the veil, and all kinds of knowledge appeared in our minds. Whether we were willing to accept it or not, we couldn't deny one point: our race was far stronger than it was during the first battle of divine will. From that moment on, no one doubted the gift of God. Just as I said, once you experience this feeling once, you will never forget it. She picked up a new cup of coffee and said, Now do you understand what I mean by it's too late? No matter what you obtain from the dream world, as long as you obtain the human's inheritance fragment, it will all belong to the victor. Do you want to use the warning of betraying the oracle to stop this war? That will only be a waste of effort. Even Mentor Heathtillies could not do it, let alone a human male. Indeed. Roland sighed. But I never intended to use a warning to stop the war. What are you trying to say? Valkyries frowned. Chapter 1322. Are you sure you can win? The Nightmare Lord did not avoid his gaze. The two stared at each other for a long time before Roland replied, "Of course I can win this war. If you have another 100 years, even if you hide in the Blackstone region, you will still be wiped out by the humans. But I can't wait that long. The Oracle's warning indicates that danger is imminent. I need to reach the bottomless land as soon as possible, and I need your help. Help me speed up the defeat of the demons, or rather, your Western Front army." Roland crossed his legs. For example, the processing method of God's Stone of Retaliation, the abilities of the King and the Grand Lord, the weakness of the spider demons, etc. This is also the reason why I sought you out. As long as you can think of, bang. Valkyrie slammed her palm on the table, causing coffee to spill from the cup. "Don't be too arrogant, male." She suppressed her voice. "You can kill me, but don't expect me to kneel and beg for mercy. As for me betraying my race, don't even think about it. Help you defeat the Western Front army? Dream on. Impudent. Don't be rude to His Majesty." The witches shouted at the same time. Both sides were in a state of mutual hostility, and the atmosphere seemed to have dropped to a freezing point. "What's going on with that table?" The whispers of others came from the side. "A couple quarrel. The number is obviously wrong. But speaking of which, the girls around him are really beautiful. That Peninsula guy is even better. Damn it, where did he come from? I'm so envious." Roland rolled his eyes in his heart. The murderous intent on both sides was clearly overflowing, so where was the shadow of romance? "All right, control yourselves." He pretended to be nonchalant and waved his hand, signaling for Phyllis and the rest to stop. He then leaned back on the bench and looked down at the Nightmare Lord. "Don't you think that refusing to accept reality is a betrayal of the race?" "Reality?" "That's right." Roland's voice suddenly deepened. "If the Oracle's warning is true, then there are only two paths before all civilizations. One is to fight the battle of divine will to the end, and the other is to completely end this endless war through the realm of mind. Don't tell me you don't know what the consequences of your choice will be." Without giving the other party a chance to refute, he raised his voice a little. "After staying in the dream world for so long, you should know how much I can raise the overall strength of the human race. Without the new legacy shard, with your current strength, you won't be able to contend against me. If the war goes on for decades, how many people will your tribe have to sacrifice? How much price will you have to pay? Is this the result you wish to see?" "Then they also died honorably on the battlefield." "No, he died in a meaningless lie." Roland corrected him. "Furthermore, due to the existence of the legacy shard, this war will never be resolved. Hatred and suspicion will cause the flames of war to spread to the Blackstone region until your clan no longer exists. The only one who can stop it is me. Once I am gone, the destruction of the demons is only a matter of time. Compared to losing a vanguard army, isn't it obvious which method is more beneficial to the race?" Valkyrie's face was ashen. He did not say a word. "In fact, we might not have much time left. If we miss the opportunity to end the war, then there will be no other way out." He put down his leg and leaned forward slightly. "Now, do you still insist on your opinion?" After a moment of silence, the Nightmare King said coldly, "Male, why should I believe you? Based on what the Oracle said, once you become a god, who can guarantee that you will let my clan live? Based on your words. You don't have a better choice. On one side, there is a possibility of survival. On the other side, it is destined to perish. That's all." Roland softened his tone. "The purpose of the war has changed. What was impossible in the past doesn't mean it's impossible now. As long as we think from a different perspective, both races can live." Valkyrie's lips were tightly shut. He did not speak. Roland did not wait any longer. "I know this is a difficult choice, so I don't expect an immediate answer. Go back first." He raised his head in disbelief. "That's it? What else? Tie you up and torture you? Or kill you directly? I said, at least for now, you're free. Roland took out his cell phone. By the way, give me your number. That way, I can tell you about the war in the north immediately. This might help you make a decision. Don't forget, the future of the demons is in your hands. Although he looked reluctant, Valkyries still gave him his number. Just as he was about to leave, Roland called out to him. I want to ask you another question. Do you think that a transformer, Heathtalese from 1,000 years ago, did something wrong? Valkyries' figure paused for a moment, and he left the dining hall without looking back. Your Majesty, are you really going to let a senior demon move freely in the dream world? Phyllis asked worriedly. Not so. Roland shook his head. Haven't you noticed? She's no longer the senior demon she used to be. The demon didn't die immediately after losing the magic stone, and even had a corresponding identity. This could only mean one thing: she's now one with the dream world. Roland firmly believed in humanity's victory, but winning in 100 years was not the same as winning in 10 years. He needed to inflict pain on the demons in the shortest time possible, making them completely lose the will to resist, and thus clear a path to the bottomless land. The Nightmare Lord was just one of the cards. No matter what choice she made, she would not be able to change this decision. But at the same time, no one would complain about having more cards in their hands at such a critical moment. If he could win over a former senior demon, the pressure on the First Army would undoubtedly lessen significantly. After all, time was what he lacked the most at the moment. The winner is contestant Fei Yuhan. Wow! The audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. She waved at the tens of thousands of spectators, then walked down the arena under the incessant flashing lights, and entered the contestants' lounge. This was a match with a predetermined outcome. Even if her opponent did not deliberately go easy on her according to the Guardian's instructions, she still managed to defeat him within the first minute of the match. In the past, such an outcome would not have made her feel any joy, but it was different this time. This was because she saw Valkyries, who had left for a long time, return to the arena. And a few hours ago, she had left the arena at the same time as Roland. After changing her clothes, Fei Yuhan boarded the association's bus and quietly waited for Valkyries' arrival. The anticipation in her heart did not subside. She had never experienced such a feeling. When Valkyries appeared in her vision, she could even hear the thumping of her chest. Just as Fei Yuhan expected, Valkyries sat beside her. I won today's match. Ah! Congratulations, Valkyries said absent-mindedly. This was a rare expression for her. Thank you. It's a pity you didn't sign up for the competition. Otherwise, I would have been able to admire the strength of an outstanding martialist from the Kargard Peninsula. There will be a chance, she replied. Of course, there will be a chance. Fei Yuhan smiled. Even without observing his expression, Fei Yuhan could tell that Valkyries was being perfunctory. But since she knew that Valkyries came from another world, and that world seemed to be rather ancient, she could use more direct methods to obtain information. After all the people returning to the sanatorium had arrived, the bus started moving. When the bus reached the suburbs, Fei Yuhan secretly stretched out her finger and reached for Valkyrie's shoulder bag. This was the bag she had bought for Valkyries as a discharge gift. Before this, she had looked through the bag countless times and knew its shape like the back of her hand. There was an unfinished area between the main road and the newly built road in the city, but it did not affect the traffic. At most, there would be some tremors and dust. At the moment when the tires rolled over the uneven road, a condensed force of nature appeared at her fingertips and gently slid down. It was as if it was a natural fall. An inconspicuous decorative piece fell into her hand. And hidden within it was a miniature voice recorder. Chapter 1323. Fei Yuhan returned to her room in the Greenland Sanatorium, locked the door, and took out a recording device embedded in a decorative piece. It was about the size of a grain of rice and did not have a playback function. She needed to insert it into a special reader to listen to the recorded content. After transferring the data into the notebook, she found the recording that was closest to the moment when Valkyries left the dojo and pressed play. BZZ. Bzz, we meet again, Miss Vaucries. Roland's voice sounded. He's here. Fei Yuhan curled her lips and brewed herself a cup of hot tea. She decided to enjoy the fruits of her long planning. The steaming hot tea gradually cooled down, and the owner of the tea did not even have the time to take a sip. Even though she had a premonition, she realized that what she had heard was far beyond her imagination. When she pressed the stop button, Fei Yuhan realized that her fingertips were trembling slightly. For a martial artist who had been famous for a long time, this could be considered as losing control. She finally understood why the hunter, Roland, would crush the wine glass in his hand during the banquet. If the secret of God was involved, it would be abnormal if he did not turn pale with fright. A dream world that was created, a civilization that fought for survival, a connection between two worlds, and a guardian that traversed the realm of mind. Was there anything more incredible than this? Fei Yuhan was slightly disappointed that the two chose to talk face to face in a coffee shop, but after listening to them, she realized that even if she said the content openly, others would only think that it was nonsense. Even so, Fei Yuhan did not think that what the two said was false. If she had been secretly observing Roland since the day he had been faking it, it would be too much of an exaggeration. If this world was really created by humans, then she would probably be the first person to pry into the truth behind the scenes. Heh. Fei Yuhan laughed softly. This feeling is really too satisfying. As for the oracle's question about whether it was fiction or reality, she did not care at all. No one knew better than herself that she was a living existence. Whether it was her movements or the thoughts that popped up in her mind, they all came from her own will. It was the same when she took the initiative to explore the outsider's secrets. Perhaps Roland was one of the creators of the world, but so what? If a planet was created by cosmic energy and elementary particles, then there was no essential difference if the former was replaced with a person. Fei Yuhan leaned against the chair and allowed her body to tremble as she enjoyed this long-awaited happiness. After a long time, his excited emotions gradually calmed down. Logically speaking, the Martialist Association should have reported such critical information as the gods' futile attempt to destroy this world and the nature of the fallen evils. However, since it involved so many people and could almost rewrite history, she decided to observe for a while longer. After all, apart from the conversation between the two of them, she did not have any concrete evidence on hand. Moreover, the possibility that both of them were severe hysteria addicts could not be ruled out. She had also heard of the urban legend that there was a chance of developing telepathy and resonating with people of the same kind since the second grade of middle school. Although the probability of such a situation was extremely low, she had to be on guard. Fortunately, Vaucries had officially established a relationship with Roland, so there would only be more opportunities for her to pry into his secrets. Now, what interested Fei Yuhan the most was the other world that the two of them originally resided in. For example, those women who called Roland, Your Majesty. If they could come to the dream world, could I also see what the other world looks like? To see the so-called reality. Where did you run off to? Garcia glared at Roland in dissatisfaction. Didn't you say you were going to watch the match with Zero? Sorry, the association had something to tell them, so I couldn't do anything about it. Roland rubbed the back of his head. He was in the wrong, so he was very decisive in admitting defeat. In order to avoid the time when he and Vaucries would return, he purposely stayed at the restaurant for a while longer. He did not expect to run into the evening rush hour, which resulted in the two of them waiting at the entrance of the dojo for another half an hour. If not for my patrolling mission, I would have left you behind long ago. Garcia said unhappily. Bring the little girl to a good meal to make up for it. She patted Zero's head. The latter nodded and ran to Roland's side with small quick steps. She even bowed to Garcia and said, Thank you, sister. If he mistreats you, you must tell me. Okay. This girl, she actually pretended to be so obedient in front of outsiders. Roland could not help but curse inwardly, but on the surface, he looked extremely sincere. Don't worry, leave it to me. Oh right, do you want me to bring you some too? No need. Garcia waved generously. You guys go ahead, I'll return to the dojo first. Sorry to trouble you today. Roland said goodbye to Garcia and shrugged at Zero. Let's go, there's a commercial plaza in front. You can choose whatever you want to eat tonight. Okay. Zero replied in a muffled voice. Strange, shouldn't she take the opportunity to demand an exorbitant price? Roland was slightly surprised. Why did she suddenly become so quiet? Why, wasn't today's match exciting? No, it was much better than on TV, that's good. When you come back from the holidays, I'll take you to watch a few more live matches. Anyway, I'm a member of the association, so it shouldn't be difficult to get tickets. They crossed the road along the sidewalk and walked side by side on the crowded street. The snow under their feet had been stepped on, leaving only the sound of pa-chi pa-chi. However, more snowflakes floated down from the night sky and were dyed with gorgeous colors by the flashing neon lights. At this rate, the city would become pure white again tomorrow morning. Gradually, Zero fell behind. Roland suddenly felt that the corner of his clothes was being tugged by something. He stopped and turned around in surprise. The little girl lowered her head and pulled his clothes without saying a word. What's wrong? Roland was stunned. It's my fault that I didn't accompany you, but work. Zero shook her head. I don't want to go back. What? I don't want to go back to my hometown, uncle. She raised her head and bit her lip. Can I continue to live at your place during the 2 months of the holidays? I'll find a way to pay the rent. I used to pay for groceries before, so it'll definitely be faster now. I promise I won't be late. Looking at the little girl who seemed to have plucked up her courage, Roland was momentarily speechless. The lines of handwriting in her diary that he had peeked at in the beginning seemed to resurface in his mind, and he suddenly felt that he had done something wrong. It was no secret that Zero's family was not harmonious. Judging from her usual words and deeds, as well as the way she ate and dressed, her family was probably quite harsh on her. However, Roland had never intervened, or it could be said that he had deliberately maintained the status quo. Because she was the other creator of this world. Therefore, if he wanted the dream world to run as usual, maintaining the inertia was undoubtedly the safest way. This was also the reason why he did not immediately let Zero join the association after she had awakened. Would changing the status quo increase the possibility of awakening the other side of her? If she became a pure witch again, what would happen to this world? He had always been on guard against this happening. However, Roland had neglected the original form of Zero, a 13 or 14-year-old girl. Do you really think that this world is fictional? When Lon asked him, he gave a negative answer. However, he did not do this when it came to Zero. No, can't I? The little girl's voice became softer and softer as the courage she had mustered gradually faded. You know, I'm not your legal guardian. If I keep you in the tube-shaped apartment, it'll be fine for a day or two, but if it's too long, your family will definitely come looking for you. By then, no matter how unwilling you are, it'll be impossible for you to continue living here, and I'll get into a lot of trouble. Zero's eyes dimmed. But there's a way to change this fact. Roland squatted down and patted the snow off her shoulder. Really? She suddenly raised her head. Just join the Martialist Association. At any time, the association is a legal shelter for the awakened. As long as you decide to stay, no one can change your mind, even if you're underage. Roland laughed. This is the privilege of a martialist. How about it, do you want to become a martialist? But even if you join the association, you still have to continue your studies. Don't think that you don't have to go to school anymore. He raised his eyebrows. As for the competition, it doesn't matter. If you don't like fighting, it's fine not to participate. His words seemed to put the last burden on Zero's shoulders. She took a deep breath and nodded vigorously. Then I'll join. Okay, I'll help you fill out the application form when we get back. After that, you can live wherever you want. Can I live in 0825? Roland held out his hand to her. Of course. The inertia had been broken. The future changes might be unknown. But it was all a choice of free will. Chapter 13:24. At noon the next day after he woke up from the dream, Roland received a piece of good news. The Ministry of Engineering and the Ministry of Construction had finally completed the site and equipment arrangement for the Glory of the Sun project. Since 52 kilograms of spherical uranium-235 could reach the critical state in theory, element purification was not the biggest hurdle. Lucia had been busy for so long and had accumulated hundreds of kilograms of pure uranium in the Institute of High Energy Physics. However, the power of the fission reaction could not be fully exerted by piling up uranium-235, unless the amount of uranium-235 was shockingly large. However, its safety and practicality would be greatly reduced, so it needed a specific configuration to stimulate its energy efficiency. Another key point of the project was the test explosion. It was one thing to calculate in theory, but another to put it into practice. From the theoretical device to the actual product, it was almost impossible to succeed in one try. According to statistics, many of the weapons developed by Roland for the First Army had failed more than double digits during the test, even with the help of reliable blueprints and witches. The Glory of the Sun project was undoubtedly more special. Other weapons could be manufactured, improved, and tested in one place, but not the fission reaction. Whether the result was a success or a failure, there would be a forbidden area. In fact, it took nearly a month to inspect the test site. Although the fertile plains was vast, it was obviously not suitable for the test explosion as the main development direction of Neverwinter in the future. There were many isolated islands in the fjords, but they were too far away from each other. Now that the sea transportation was under great pressure, it was difficult to find ships to transport all kinds of equipment. The uninhabited desert in the south seemed to be the most suitable place. However, considering that a large number of match men had been buried there for future development, Roland hesitated for a long time and rejected the southernmost region. The test explosion site was finally set to the west of the Great Snow Mountain, the former demon outpost camp. Although it was possible to encounter demonic beasts and demons there, the risk was still acceptable. At the same time, whether the test explosion was successful or not, it would form a polluted area, which would improve the security of Neverwinter's rear. Only after crossing these two thresholds could they be considered qualified for the nuclear test. Your Majesty, please take me with you. Me too. I won't say any more. As long as it's a weapon that can kill demons, I'll try it no matter what. While receiving the message, Roland also received a conversation request from the third border city. Looking at the three big faces on the other side of the light screen, he could not help but wipe his sweat. This is just a theoretical device test. It's still far from a real weapon test. Ever since he instilled the concept of the Glory of the Sun into the Tequila Witches, Pasha and Celine had been obsessed with it. However, he did not expect that even Alethea would join in, and there seemed to be a hint of devotion in her tone. If it is really as you say, and it can illuminate the dark clouds above mankind, then I hope to be able to witness its birth along the way. Pasha lowered her mane whiskers. I've also contributed a lot to the manufacturing of the core components of the Glory of the Sun. You can't possibly let the participants of the plan stay here, right? Celine added. But there is no tunnel from the Great Snow Mountain to the experimental observation point, don't worry about that. There's no sun during the months of demons, so we'll spend more time outside than usual. Alethea replied hurriedly, as if she was afraid that he would say no. Besides, the passage that Fran went through last time is still there. We won't attract anyone's attention when we leave the city. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at Anna, who nodded at him with a smile. Since the three of them had come to this point, it would be unreasonable to disagree. Then I'll ask the Ministry of Construction to reserve a place for you in the bunker. Remember to bring some God's punishment witches with you and be careful on the road. Thank you, Your Majesty. The three of them said happily. Looking at this scene, Roland felt a little emotional. In his previous life, this kind of weapon was often regarded as an opportunity for self-destruction. Countless literary works and biographies described it as the sword of Damocles hanging over mankind's head. But here, it was the dawn of hope. When darkness came, only strength could protect civilization and cut through thorns. He looked at Anna and said, "Let's go." 50 kilometers north of Shangxi in the heavy snow. The snow here was much heavier than in Neverwinter. Not only did it cover the land that had been corroded by demons, but it also made the construction of the bunker extremely difficult. Fortunately, with the help of the powerful god's punishment witches, the construction team finally settled down in this uninhabited place. To ensure the quality of the project, the workers in the team were all elites from the Northern Expedition Regiment. After experiencing the bloody battles on the fertile plains, the harsh weather was not the toughest enemy. Moreover, they had been informed before they set off that this construction project was the top secret of Neverwinter. It was related to the future of their homeland and the kingdom. Coupled with the high remuneration offered by the administrative office, everyone was motivated to work. If it were in Grey Castle in the past, no matter how much the nobles pressured them, they would never allow their subordinates to open up a camp in such a place. It took Roland and his team nearly 2 days to reach the explosion test site. After entering the command post that was half buried in the ground, they saw a completely different scene in the room. The thick brick walls blocked the wind and snow, the blazing fireplace crackled, and the project leaders were holding oil lamps and checking their tasks against the forms. They looked extremely busy. Seeing his arrival, everyone stopped what they were doing and then saluted, "Your Majesty." "Go on with your work," Roland waved his hand and then looked at Car van Bait. "How's the situation here?" "We haven't found any traces of demons in the past month," Car replied. "They should have completely abandoned this place. As for demonic beasts, we occasionally see dozens of them, but they're not a threat to the garrison troops. The explosion test site and simulation equipment have been built. If you don't have any other instructions, they can completely meet the requirements of the plan." "Where's the explosion test site?" "North, 15 kilometers away from here." Carr pointed at the map and said, "You can't see it from the command post. The snow here is too thick. Even if it's as high as a 3-story building, it'll be blocked by the snow." "It doesn't matter. We'll naturally see it when it explodes." Roland smiled and turned to Anna. "Then let's start the first explosion test." In order to verify the feasibility of the explosion, the two had prepared at least 3 configurations for the test in the past 6 months. This time, it was the simplest configuration of a gun. Chapter 1325. 15 kilometers away. The high platform made of steel stood tall in the white snowfield. It did not look like a creation of this era. The neat and dense structure, the beams and steel cables with icicles hanging from them, and the layers of barbed wire surrounded it, all revealed the beauty of the industry. Hundreds of people surrounded it, preparing for the detonation. As the entire device weighed nearly 10 tons, and Hummingbird had gone to the front, it could not be assembled in Neverwinter. They could only transport the parts to the test explosion site and assemble it on the spot. Fortunately, its structure was very simple, and the need for disassembly and transportation was taken into account during the design, so it was not demanding on the workers. This was also the difference between the Glory of the Sun and other weapons. Even if the site and equipment had been set up, it still took 1 or 2 days to complete the final preparations. At this moment, Roland and Anna were standing on the top of the tower, directing the assembly of the device. Next is the third core component. Pay attention to the direction of the interface, be careful. Everyone, listen to my command. 3, 2, 1. As the leader of the workers shouted, a silver-white cylinder was slowly pushed into the device. Until this step was completed, Roland slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Inside the cylinder was the main source of energy for the test explosion, 2 separated uranium-235 cylinders, each weighing 20 kilograms. When the 2 were combined, it would provide a total charge mass of 40 kilograms. This value was lower than the critical limit of 53 kilograms. In theory, there would not be a violent fission reaction, but as he had said before, the critical value was not a fixed value. Conditions such as shape, temperature, and pressure could change the value, which was why nuclear weapons that relied purely on materials had little practical value. For example, 52 kilograms of uranium-235 in the spherical state seemed stable, but in fact, it was already a volcano that was ready to erupt. Even a slight impact or vibration could cause it to cross the critical point. Similarly, although it was safe to use several small uranium blocks, it would also make the detonation more difficult. When several uranium blocks were combined into one, the whole could indeed exceed the critical point, but the high temperature produced by the fission reaction would cause the uranium block to expand rapidly, reducing its density, and the violent explosion would push the raw materials far away, thus interrupting the reaction. In short, a reasonable configuration not only had to make the uranium reach a critical state, but it also had to be maintained as long as possible in order to unleash the power of the fission reaction. The reason why the gun configuration was called a gun configuration was because its principle was very similar to the ancient guns. Through the detonation of explosives, one piece of uranium would suddenly push another piece of uranium. Under great pressure, the density of the uranium would increase rapidly. Even if the mass was slightly lower, it could still cross the critical point. When the outer shell of the device was connected, Anna personally inserted a can with a warning sign of the radioactive source into the reserved tail port. It was also the last critical component of the test explosion. For a moment, Roland felt as if his face had been pricked by something, and even his breathing stopped for half a beat. Beryllium neutron source. Just like its name suggested, it could provide a large number of free neutrons for fission, and it was the most direct way to reduce the critical value. Inside the can-like metal container, there was a row of hollow spheres. Each sphere was the size of a ping-pong ball, and the core was a marble-like spheroid. It was tightly wrapped in gold foil, and around it was a honeycomb of beryllium sheets. When the uranium pieces collided, they would also smash the small can at the bottom of the gun barrel. All the hollow spheres would be compressed by the violent explosive gas until they were thinner than paper. After the gold foil broke, the beryllium sheets would be intimately attached to the spheroid, completely accepting the alpha particles released by the spheroid, and then blasting out several times the number of neutrons. These neutrons would participate in the fission reaction of uranium-235. If luck was on their side, they could consume a few more % of the raw material before the reaction was terminated, greatly increasing the power of the nuclear weapon. Since the half-life of polonium-210 was only 138 days, it was essential to provide a replacement port. In addition, leaving the neutron source in the weapon for a long time was also extremely dangerous. After all, as long as the beryllium was in contact with it, it would spontaneously release neutrons. Once the gold foil was damaged, the consequences would be unimaginable. After the beryllium neutron source was installed in the principal device, it turned from a gentle and harmless thing into a monster that could engulf everyone on the scene at any time. Although Roland knew that what he felt was just an illusion, and it was impossible for a human to capture the changes in the number of neutrons in the environment, he still subconsciously breathed a lot lighter. At this step, the principal device officially completed all the preparation work before detonation. Anna took the initiative to hold his hand. "Give the order." Roland nodded slightly under the other party's calm and steady gaze. Regardless of the result, the glory of the Sun Project had finally reached this step. After taking this step, mankind would enter a new realm. He looked at Sean. "Pass my order. Inform the command post to start the ignition in 6 hours." "Yes, Your Majesty." 6:00, woo, 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 woo. Device number 1 has entered the ignition stage. I repeat, device number 1 has entered the ignition stage. All personnel, please pack up immediately and leave the site in an orderly manner according to the drill plan. Please note, this is not a drill. The test explosion site will be closed in an hour. Everyone must evacuate to a safe area before then. Soon, the evacuation announcement was heard along with the alarm. "Hurry up, everyone gather in the open space in front of the tower. Don't leave anyone behind. Construction Team 2, count off. 1, 2, 3. Seal the test explosion site door. All members of the God's Punishment Witch Squad are here. Begin evacuation. The quiet snowfield seemed to be boiling. People's shouts and the repeated alarm echoed each other, and the atmosphere became tense and dignified. Everyone knew that they were about to witness an unprecedented experiment. 300. In the command post, Roland and Anna took out 2 keys and opened the cover of the control panel. When the switches were pressed one by one, the green lights on the table lit up one after another. The main cable is transmitting power. Mystery Moon number 1 is working normally. The load is rising steadily. Now switch to line 1. Understood. Line 1 has been connected. The power supply to the device is working normally. The observer reported the operation of the detonation system loudly. When the last green light lit up, it meant that the electric current had been conducted to the high platform 15 kilometers away. 100. The alarm above the command post also sounded. It meant that there was only 1 hour left for the detonation procedure. The doors and windows of the bunker were all closed, and the oil lamps were extinguished one by one to avoid accidents caused by the vibration. The higher-ups of Neverwinter entered a special observation room. According to Roland's instructions, the outer surface of the room was built in the shape of a trapezoid to better withstand the shock waves, and the inner side was deepened to accommodate the huge body of the original carrier. Pasha and the other tequila witches had been waiting for a long time. 15. The sky gradually darkened. The last round of urgent sirens finally arrived. Whether it was the higher-ups, soldiers, or workers, they all put on black sunglasses to block out the strong light according to the rehearsal. Although most people did not understand why they had to wear glasses to block their vision on such a dark snowy day. Didn't that mean he couldn't see anything? 0:05 Countdown. 5 minutes. When the announcement sounded again, the scene had become silent. All communication and discussion had stopped. Everyone stared fixedly at the pitch-black darkness in front of them, involuntarily holding their breaths. Countdown of 3 minutes. Roland felt sweat forming on his palms. Anna looked at him with a smile and gently held his hand. 1 minute. A hand reached over from the other side and 5 fingers overlapped. Countdown of 10 seconds. 9. Although it was a pity that he could not press the detonation button himself, Roland knew that this was only the beginning of his long historical journey. 3. 2. 1. Detonate. The snowfield in the distance was quiet, as if nothing had happened. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. It felt like a long time had passed, but it also felt like only a short moment. Chapter 1326. Pasha, on the other hand, had a clearer view. The original carriers didn't rely on their eyes. For her, Aletheia, and Celine, any of their tentacles could be used as their eyes, so they couldn't wear anything to block the light. Even though Roland had reminded them that it was best to avoid looking directly at the center of the explosion for 5 to 10 seconds after the detonation, they didn't look away until the very last second. It wasn't just her, the other two did the same. No one wanted to miss this long-awaited scene. Could humans defeat demons? During the hundreds of years that the tequila survivors had been hiding underground, no one dared to ask this question. At that time, they had gritted their teeth and persevered for the sake of their responsibility and their sisters who had sacrificed themselves. As for the final outcome, anyone who thought about it would feel resistant, afraid that their unremitting efforts and fighting spirit would be destroyed. The pitch-black ceiling that they saw every day when they raised their heads was the deepest impression in their memories. And this darkness was broken by a brilliant blue light. It wasn't pure blue. Unlike pigments, paint, gems, or lake water, Pasha found it hard to describe. It was more like an illusion that it was blue because it was too white. The light expanded rapidly along the horizon and illuminated the land in an instant. She couldn't help but be dumbfounded. This was the first time she had seen something other than the sun and the moon that could illuminate the entire land. It wasn't an illusion. She clearly saw the originally dark snowfield return to its daytime appearance. Trees cast heavy shadows on the snow, and the closer one got to the center of the white light, the clearer the outline of the land became. Almost at the same time, Pasha felt a sharp pain in front of her, as if her skin was burning. This was the experience of being exposed to the midday sun. But she didn't feel the slightest fear in her heart. She even opened all the tentacles on her body to receive the light that broke through the darkness. If it could bring new hope to humans, what was this little bit of pain? It would only bring more pleasure in return. The light only lasted for less than a second before it turned from blue to white, and then from white to red. Then, the ground shook violently, and the airflow that rushed toward them brought up pieces of flying snow, which hit the outer wall of the bunker, making a crackling sound. Finally, there was a deafening roar that lasted for a long time, as if the entire earth was roaring. After the explosion, the world became quiet again. A strange cloud appeared on the horizon in the distance. It was large at the top and small at the bottom, like a mushroom extending upwards. At the top of the mushroom, dark red flames could still be seen rolling. Lighting up the sky with his own strength was definitely an effect that no firearm could compare to. He could feel such power from 15 kilometers away. What would it be like if he was close by? Pasha could already imagine the scene when the new weapon exploded among the demons. She had thought that the bombardment of over 100 cannons was already the most shocking scene, but compared to this scene, it was not even worth mentioning. If the artillery drill 2 years ago could be said to have changed the worldview of every tequila witch, then this experiment could be said to have reshaped the concepts that they had painstakingly formed in their minds. Whoosh! Enthusiastic cheers erupted in the command post and observation room. The main tentacles of the 3 senior witches were also entangled together. For the first time, Aletheia didn't call them mortals or ordinary people to distinguish them. Celine's voice was full of excitement. Pasha interrupted. Celine replied without hesitation. Aletheia also expressed her agreement. A year ago, the standard of victory was to resist the attack of the demons, persist until the end of the battle of divine will, and then look for opportunities after 400 years of development. Unknowingly, this standard had been raised a lot. Pasha finally laughed. Humans could defeat demons. And it might be faster than they had expected. That was because that expanse of darkness no longer existed. Among all the jubilant crowd, only Roland and Anna maintained their usual calmness. What's the result? Anna asked as she took off her sunglasses. At least we've taken the first step. Roland spread his hands. The theoretical device had undoubtedly triggered a fission reaction. That extremely dazzling flash was proof. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to cause such a huge wave just by relying on the thousands of kilograms of explosives in the device. But judging from the subsequent shock wave and smoke column, it was obvious that the effect was quite different from what he had expected. They should have been more violent. As for the specific result, we can only make a judgment after the command post has collected all the on-site data. Half an hour later, the experimental team successively brought back the detection devices set up around the site, floating papers. Since it was impossible to accurately measure the yield of the explosives with the current technical means in Neverwinter, Roland naturally thought of using paper to measure the power method. When the airwave blew here, the paper would be thrown into the air, and affected by the explosion wind, the paper would fall farther than before. Based on this difference, the approximate yield of the explosion could be estimated. Roland did not need to calculate it himself. He had already copied a complete parameter table from the dream world, and he only needed to compare the statistical results. Although there was a certain error in this method, it was enough to guide the experiment. After comparison, the result was not much different from what he had expected. The power of the theoretical device explosion this time was only about 3,000 tons of TNT, and the amount of uranium-235 used was as much as 40 kilograms. If the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, used only 6% of the raw materials to participate in the fission reaction, and the explosive yield was 13,000 tons of TNT, then the nuclear material utilization rate in this experiment was less than 2%, and it could be said to be a dirty bomb. Of course, it was not to say that Roland was very disappointed. After all, in the history of weapons, there was no such thing as a so-called dirty bomb standard. Compared with the small nuclear weapons that were often used as high as tens of times, these veterans that had been put into actual combat were all classified as dirty bombs. A 152mm grenade with a charge of only a few kilograms could cause astonishing damage, let alone 3,000 tons of TNT. In terms of the experiment, the first theoretical device could not be considered very successful, but it was still a deadly weapon. It looks like the road ahead will be very long. Anna put down the form and let out a long breath. Her eyes were not the slightest bit discouraged, but full of fighting spirit. That's right. Roland nodded. Chapter 1327. A week later, a strange-looking vehicle slowly drove into the test explosion site. It was the first crawler tractor manufactured by the Ministry of Industry of Neverwinter based on the complete set of blueprints and technical instructions provided by the Grey Pot Design Bureau. However, other than the chassis being the same, its appearance was completely different from that of the experimental product. The vehicle was surrounded by thick armor plates and looked like a moving square box at first glance. After driving into the explosion zone, it stopped in front of the melted iron tower for about half an hour before turning around and driving south along the original road. After driving for about 5 kilometers, a wheeled truck approached and picked up all the people on board, while the square box tractor was directly abandoned in the snow. This group of people traveled all the way and returned to Neverwinter from the Great Snow Mountain the next day. Upon receiving the news, Roland summoned them to the castle immediately. How was it? Did you encounter any accidents? Please rest assured, Your Majesty. Everything went smoothly. Phyllis smiled and presented a sigil to him. Summer quickly located the scene at that time. We stayed longer than expected. Because there was a specific time, it wasn't too difficult, Summer said shyly. Compared to the other sisters, my ability to control my ability is considered poor. All right, don't be modest. It's true, Roland took the sigil, but his expression was still solemn. He tilted his head to look at Momo beside him. Sorry to trouble you. No, you're too kind, Your Majesty. Momo reached out to cover one of her eyes to avoid seeing His Majesty. At the same time, she displayed her ability. After a while, she put down her hand and bowed to Roland. Everyone's number and color haven't changed significantly. It's basically the same as when we set off. Only then did Roland let out a sigh of relief. He smiled and said, Thank you for your hard work. You too, the witches replied in unison. Meals have been prepared in the reception hall. Chaos drinks are available in unlimited quantities. Please fill your stomachs first. Roland looked at the joyful faces of the witches and shook his head with a smile. As for the tequila witches who participated in the operation, they were basically regulars in the dream world, so there was no need for any additional rewards. Using Summer's backtracking ability to observe the instantaneous changes when the weapon was in action had always been the most reliable improvement method of the engineering department. By adjusting the backtracking speed, he could clearly understand the state of the target at every moment. Most of the problems and loopholes could be seen at a glance. However, as mentioned before, the glory of the sun was different from other weapons, especially the dirty bomb that had yet to fully activate. There would be a lot of materials that emitted fatal radiation left in the area. If one were to enter rashly, they would undoubtedly suffer from a large amount of radiation damage. For this reason, Roland did not hesitate to put the first tractor prototype into the project and modified it into a radiation-proof vehicle. Its left, right, rear, and bottom were wrapped with multiple layers of lead plates, sandwiched in the middle with gold foil and beryllium sheets. The overall thickness was up to 10 centimeters, making it highly shielded against photons, electrons, and neutron jets. Only the steam engine powered by the magic cube could handle the structural weight of the comprehensive protection. In addition, the car was equipped with oxygen and was almost completely isolated from the outside world, preventing the risk of radioactive dust entering the car through the ventilation channel. In order to observe the scene of the explosion, a huge lead-containing glass was installed in front of the car. The thickness of the glass was an astonishing 30 centimeters. Considering that entering and exiting the explosion test field might cause contaminants to stick to the tracks and armor, he specifically requested that once the personnel were sent out of the most dangerous core area, they should immediately change vehicles and abandon the former in the snow. It could be said that Roland had used all the safety measures he could think of, but even so, it was still difficult for him to relax. Fortunately, the final results showed that the observation operation was a complete success. After getting the first-hand information from the crime scene, Roland immediately started researching with Anna and Celine. Using the sigil of time to replay the scene that had been slowed down hundreds of times, the flaws of the number 1 principal device gradually surfaced. "Our explosives are too weak," Anna said in a low voice. "I can also see that the impact of the explosion didn't seem to be transmitted to the gun barrel." Celine nodded her main tentacle. "Can we use batch detonation to solve this problem? I'm afraid there's not much hope in a short time." Roland rubbed his tired eyes. After watching the explosion live for 2 days in a row, he felt that the whole world was only left with blue and white colors. Although he had expected the problem of explosives, he did not expect it to be so obvious. Currently, Neverwinter had been mass-producing double-base smokeless gunpowder. Although it was not as powerful as RDX and other high explosives in terms of energy and explosive speed, it was enough for the army. Even if it was not powerful enough, it could be made up with quantity. However, when it was put into the principal device, the problem was revealed. More than 1,000 kilograms of explosives was definitely not a point on the blueprint. When stacked, it was as big as a safe. In order to transmit the explosive energy to the uranium, Roland specially made a funnel-like lens, hoping to concentrate the impact force as much as possible. There was no problem with this idea, but before the detonation reached this step, there was already a problem. Because the total volume of the explosives was too large, and every point was detonated at the same time, the shock waves produced by the explosives in front and behind offset each other. This could be clearly seen from the slow-motion playback. The colliding shock waves caused the entire steel lens and even the outer shell to be severely deformed, which meant that a large amount of energy acted on the outside of the gun barrel. Naturally, the energy used to move the uranium was much less. Then, there was a chain reaction. The lack of pressure in the gun barrel caused the fission to stop quickly. Most of the uranium was vaporized at high temperature, which indirectly weakened the effect of the neutron source. "We can only find another way," Roland said with his hands spread out. Without electronic explosion control technology, it was almost impossible to ignite all the explosives in 1,000th of a second and cause the shock waves to overlap. Even if they replaced it with high explosives, it would only improve but not eliminate this problem. He could ask the Ministry of Chemical Industry to try to develop low-speed explosives and place them in front of the lens to minimize the impact between the explosives as much as possible. However, this process would probably require a lot of experiments, and it was hard to say whether it would succeed or not. Now, the most reliable way was obviously to make up for the shortcomings of the detonation technology through the configuration design. "It seems that I have to work overtime tonight," he said weakly as he stretched. "I'll be with you," Anna said with a smile. "How about a black fire massage as a reward?" "I suddenly feel full of energy." Roland was refreshed. "Is there any other reward?" "Like what?" "Let me think. Oh, how about the one I mentioned last time? Is this also the knowledge I learned from the dream world?" Chapter 13:28. Scroll went up to the 3rd floor of the castle with a large stack of documents and met Nightingale, who was yawning and about to leave, in front of the office. "You're still awake?" The latter stopped and raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Probably because I'm getting old and can't sleep recently." Scroll smiled and shook her head. "Where's His Majesty? Is he asleep?" "Yes, he went back to his bedroom half an hour ago." "Then why are you still in the office?" She covered her mouth and said, "Are you eating His Majesty's snacks?" Ha. Nightingale was slightly stunned at first, then she coughed twice and said, "Yes, I ate his spicy shredded beef and took 2 sips of chaos drinks." "Don't tell His Majesty." This time it was Scroll's turn to be stunned. "What's wrong with her?" Why did she reply so directly? In the past, as long as Nightingale was not caught on the spot, she would never admit to it. But when she thought that she and Vendi often stole Nightingale's drinks, Scroll didn't know what to say for a while. Well, I'm going to bed. Nightingale looked away and walked to the second floor. Don't stay up too late. I heard from Roland that the older you get, the more serious the sequelae of lack of sleep. She looked up at the bottom of the stairs and said, "Good night." "Good night," Scroll replied inexplicably, then turned around and walked into the office. Although the fire in the fireplace had been extinguished, the remaining heat from the heater was still there, and there seemed to be some lingering fragrance in the air. It seemed that Nightingale had been here for a long time. Without thinking too much, Scroll skillfully opened the bookcase, sorted the documents in her hand into the processing column, and then took out the documents that His Majesty needed to solve. They were all extremely long lines of equations. From the handwriting, Scroll could tell that some of them were Roland's, Anna's, and Celine's. One of her daily jobs was to bring these documents to the Arithmetic Academy, let the group of astrologers calculate the answers, and then hand them over to the central carrier for verification. From the written description, these things should be related to His Majesty's new experiment. However, she could not understand how he could determine the dimensions of a device that no one had ever seen or even imagined just by calculating on a piece of paper. It was as if the numbers on the paper were not numbers, but an outline of reality. To her, this was no different from predicting the future. Every time Scroll saw Anna's elegant notes, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This girl, who was born in Border Town, had already reached a realm that they couldn't understand at all. Everyone had been sitting in the same office at the beginning, watching His Majesty's interesting scientific experiments, and anyone could have a word or two. Now, the only one who could follow His Majesty closely was Anna. However, she did not feel any sense of loss in her heart. Instead, she was filled with pride. Because they were her sisters. Scroll sat in front of Roland's desk and flipped through the documents as usual, intending to memorize all of them. This way, even if there were any omissions in the distribution calculation, she would be able to find them in time. But this time, she noticed something strange. Am I seeing things? Scroll rubbed her eyes and found that there were strings of characters floating behind some formulas, as if they were the answers to her questions. If this was an examination paper or a household registration file, it wouldn't be surprising. Ever since she mastered the technique of quick searching, she could often tell where a document came from and everything related to it at first glance. The problem was that this was the first time she had seen this information. Not only could Scroll not understand the meaning of the arithmetic formulas, but even the answers, floating behind them were also unclear. It was difficult to even understand them. Moreover, not every formula had similar strange symbols behind it. Most of the columns were still blank. If she stared at those illusory symbols for a long time, she would even feel dizzy. It seemed that Nightingale was right. Staying up too late really had an effect. Scroll sighed softly. Unfortunately, she hadn't been sleepy lately, as if her brain was always working at a high speed. Should I ask the hospital to prescribe some sleeping ferns tomorrow? She couldn't help but think that this thing didn't have much side effects on witches. Taking it once or twice shouldn't have any effect. After reluctantly memorizing all the information, Scroll suddenly felt a strong sense of dizziness, and even her consciousness became a little blurred. Her body involuntarily leaned forward, and the pen holder on the table was accidentally knocked down. But this dizziness came and went quickly. In just a few breaths, she felt that she had returned to normal. Not to mention any discomfort, her thoughts seemed to be much clearer than before. Scroll blinked her eyes, and after confirming that she was really okay, she smiled bitterly and bent down to pick up the pen holder. It was also at this moment that she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Because the appearance of the floor had changed. She would never mistake His Majesty's office. The floor was made of pine wood from the misty forest and covered with a layer of wool carpet. Although the appearance was a little old, His Majesty had never changed it. And now, the carpet under her feet was still wool carpet, but the material of the floor in the distance had changed. It had changed from wood to stone. How is this possible? Scroll cautiously raised her head, and her heart continued to sink. Not only the floor, but the whole office seemed to have changed. The recliner that Nightingale usually sat on had disappeared without a trace, and in its place was a row of old iron filing cabinets. At first glance, it looked a little like the archives in the administrative office. But I should have been in the castle before. That's right, the French windows. That was His Majesty's favorite decoration, and also a characteristic of the office. As long as you looked out, you could see the city of Neverwinter under the curtain of the night. Scroll suddenly turned around and pulled open the velvet curtains behind her. What she saw was only a grey brick wall. Without a doubt, this was no longer His Majesty's office that she was familiar with. She stood up in a panic, rushed to the wall, and knocked twice. The wall did not move at all. From the steady echo, she could tell that it was obviously not an illusion, but a real entity. Scroll felt a trace of despair. Anyone who was suddenly transferred to a completely closed and unfamiliar place would probably feel a strong sense of helplessness and vulnerability. No. She took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. It was not accurate to say that it was completely closed. In the corner between two rows of filing cabinets, there was an inconspicuous iron door. It was almost the same color as the cabinets, and if one did not look carefully, it would be easy to miss it. It seemed to be the only exit in the room. Where would the iron door lead to? Was it a trap or another wall waiting for her outside? Scroll resisted thinking about these questions, and slowly held the door handle. Click, the iron door opened with a click. A ray of golden sunlight shone into the room, and then the silence was broken. Countless sounds rushed in along with the cold air. There were noisy conversations, beeping whistles, and endless footsteps. In front of her, countless people were hurrying along with their heads down. Occasionally, some of them would glance at her, and their faces revealed a little bit of amazement. And behind this group of people, there were huge, mountain-like buildings rising one after another, occupying Scroll's entire field of vision. Chapter 1329. The Realm. After waking up, Roland stayed in bed for a while as usual before he reluctantly climbed out of the warm quilt. Anna had obviously woken up very early and devoted herself to her work. She had brought breakfast on the table. Roland lazily put on his coat and planned to go to the bathroom outside to wash up and then come back to fill his stomach. Unexpectedly, as soon as he opened the door, he saw a group of witches waiting outside. "Your Majesty." Roland could not help but feel a sense of déjà vu. There was no doubt that something big had happened in the Union for so many witches who did not participate in the war to gather here. But because he was still in the dream world, everyone was waiting for him at the door. Thinking that it was the winter of the months of demons, Nightingale and the others looked excited. He asked subconsciously, "Did someone evolve on the day of adulthood?" "It's Scroll. She's promoted to a transcendent." Nightingale replied excitedly. Following the group of chattering witches into the office, Roland saw the transcendent that everyone was talking about. Phyllis and Anna were also there. The three of them surrounded a stack of documents and seemed to be discussing something. Just by looking at Scroll's peaceful expression, he almost thought that the one who had advanced was one of the cheerful witches in front of him instead of the calm and steady teacher of the Union. "So, what's going on now?" he asked curiously. "Is Scroll really?" The three witches also noticed his arrival. Phyllis took the lead and said, "Your Majesty, I've repeatedly confirmed this with the stone of measuring. Her Excellency Scroll is probably the first non-combat transcendent in history. All the characteristics of her magic power are obviously different from before. Although this kind of improvement mostly varies from person to person and there are no specific examples for reference, according to the convention of the Union, she is indeed qualified to be called a transcendent." "Don't call me Your Excellency." Scroll smiled and shook her head. "That won't do," Phyllis said seriously. "In the era of the Union, you might be a candidate for the three chiefs." "I'm already very impolite." "You also said that it was the era of the Union," Scroll interrupted. "In the Witch Union, everyone was a sister. Also, I prefer this kind of casual name. Alright, let's put these things aside for now, Anna interrupted. Now that Roland is here, let's talk about Scroll's ability first. I thought you had already gone to the North Slope laboratory. Roland smiled at her. The latter also winked slyly. That was my original plan, but Scroll's ability is a little special, so I had to change the itinerary. Special? Yes, Anna said word by word. She saw the dream world. After listening to Scroll's story, Roland's eyes widened in surprise. How did you come back in the end? When I saw those magnificent city buildings, I suddenly thought of the dream world you described, and then I unconsciously felt a lot more at ease. Scroll slowly said, after that, I returned to the hut where I first appeared, and tried to concentrate and imagine myself leaving this secret room. When I opened my eyes again, I found that I had indeed returned to the castle office. Ah! I'm so jealous. Is that really the dream world? I also want to see it. The girls who were listening by the side could not contain their excitement, and as soon as Scroll's voice fell, they all began to shout. Well, I think it's impossible for me to create such a magnificent world with my own ability, Scroll said with a smile. As for whether it's the same dream world, perhaps your majesty will know the next time you enter the dream world. No. I'm afraid it has nothing to do with ability, Roland muttered. It has nothing to do with ability? Phyllis said in surprise. But Lady Scroll's magic power has indeed condensed, advancement is only a prerequisite. Nightmare Lord Valkyrie's words echoed in his mind. When a person's understanding of magic power reaches a certain level, they will leave traces in the realm of mind, and even open up their own unique domain. This also coincided with what Lon had said. Scroll, can you enter that sealed room again now? But you're not asleep. Scroll was stunned. It's okay, just do as I say. Roland thought for a while. If it works, try to open the iron door again. But no matter what you see, don't step out of the room, not even with your hands. Do you understand? I understand. Scroll took a deep breath, sat back behind the desk, and closed her eyes. Do you think Phyllis obviously also noticed his intention. She was also present when he met with Valkyries. It's very likely. Roland nodded slightly. About a quarter of an hour later, Scroll opened her eyes again, and revealed a look of surprise. Your Majesty, behind the door has become a red void. As expected. He had a basic understanding of the whole situation. That is the realm of mind, and also the true appearance of the origin of magic. And the small room you saw at first glance is your own unique domain in the realm of mind. Huh? Mystery Moon was puzzled. But didn't you say that the realm of mind is the crimson moon in the sky? They're just different expressions of the same thing. In fact, the realm of mind is in the bottomless land in the north of the continent. Roland briefly recounted the experience of the senior lord entering the dream world, being imprisoned, and being discovered by him, except for the information about Lon. This domain doesn't need to rely on the dream world to exist. It just happens to be within the range of the light beam of the key, so it's connected to the dream world. Wow! The group of witches let out a cry of surprise. I want to open a domain too. Mystery Moon clenched her fists. Come on, didn't you hear His Majesty say that apart from personal knowledge, it also has a lot to do with ability? Lily glanced at her. Lily glanced at her. In other words, even if you read all the books written by His Majesty, whether you can succeed or not still depends on your looks. I think it's very difficult. Traitor. Roland looked at Scroll and exhorted. Although you can communicate with the realm of mind, try to open it within the light beam of the key, and connect it with the dream world. That place is full of all kinds of dangers. If it's in the dream world, at least the gods punishment witches and I can protect you. For example, the hostile gods and the oracles who brought corruption. Even if Scroll was promoted to a transcendent, her combat ability was still close to zero. Once she encountered an enemy, the danger was self-evident. Yes. Scroll was slightly dazed, and then revealed a gentle expression. She lowered her head and bowed. I understand. Then it's time to properly test this unique new ability, Roland said with a smile. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1330. It did not take too long to test the changes in Scroll's abilities after her advancement. In fact, before Roland arrived, she and Anna had already discussed most of it. The answer that appeared at the back of the arithmetic formula was not an illusion, nor was it a result of calculation. It was the result of searching the memory. As the data contained a large number of reused formulas, and Scroll happened to have seen them, the answers appeared directly in her mind. This was especially true for complex functions. If every small term was memorized, then the total term could be quickly solved even if one didn't understand the specific meaning of the formula. Compared to looking through examination papers and files, the amount of work involved was obviously much greater, and it was not impossible in the past. But now that she could do it subconsciously, it was obvious that her main ability had improved to a considerable extent. But for the content that she had not memorized or partially memorized, she would not be able to get any answers. Therefore, to calculate the reliability of the new design sample, it had to be done by the Design Institute and the central carrier. But if Scroll had read through it once, the workload would be reduced by a lot. The main focus of the test was still on the archive, in the realm of mind, although it was currently just a simple small room. The first thing to be determined was the rules of exchange between the two worlds. After all, as a transcendent, the way Scroll entered the dream world was fundamentally different from the gods' punishment witches and the Nightmare Lord. The former had to rely on the light beam to enter the dream world, while the latter had trespassed without permission, and even her body had changed. Scroll's method was more like connecting, like driving a car into a parking lot. Whether it was her body or consciousness, she maintained a relatively high level of integrity. If she could also take the goods in the parking lot with her, it would be very important. But reality proved that there was no such beautiful thing in the world. Scroll could bring the things she carried with her into the domain, but she could not bring the things in the domain or the dream world back to reality, not even a stone. Also, it was not entirely accurate to say that she had brought the items with her, because the test items did not disappear into thin air, but were still in her hands. Sorry. Your Majesty. After several tests, Scroll looked at her empty hands and said with some frustration, it seems that my ability is still not enough. No, this is within my expectations. You don't have to worry about it. Roland and Anna looked at each other, coming to a conclusion in their hearts. The archive was probably the same as the dream world. It more or less had the power to distort reality. As long as it was within Scroll's understanding, she would be able to replicate it. At first glance, it looked like she had brought things from the outside into the realm of mind. However, it was impossible to bring it back. This made Roland secretly heave a sigh of relief. After all, Scroll was not the only one who could open up a domain in the realm of mind. According to the information obtained from Valkyries, the king of the demons not only had the presiding Holy See, but also had a strong control over the domain. When it was in the domain, it was almost no different from a god. If the creations of the two worlds could be exchanged at will, the battle of divine will would obviously be filled with more risks and uncertainties. The next test was the tolerance of the domain. Ever since his conversation with Lon, he had guessed that the dream world was also a domain of the realm of mind, just that it was a little exaggerated. Although he could not summon the wind and rain in the dream world like the Demon King, the commonalities of domains should be universal, such as accepting consciousness. After Scroll's advancement, the light beam key expanded to about 1 meter. Although it was still a distance from the requirements of the Chosen One, she was already the fourth witch in Neverwinter, only inferior to Roland, Leaf and Evelyn. And this range of the light beam could accommodate 4 gods' punishment witches standing side by side. If the ancient witches entered the dream world because their light beams happened to be covered by the dream world's light beam, could they enter the archive in the same way? The result of the test greatly excited Roland. While he was awake, Phyllis relied on Scroll's domain to restore the appearance of 400 years ago. This undoubtedly verified his speculation. The outline of the realm of mind gradually became clear in his mind. However, the relationship between the number of people entering and the range of the light beam did not seem to be simple. Even if 4 gods' punishment witches closely stuck to scroll and fell asleep, only one could reach the archive. Of course, it was enough for one person to enter. The final point was to locate the archive and determine its position in the dream world. If the high-rise building that Scroll saw was really a scene in the dream world, then she and Roland would definitely meet in the realm of mind. Just as the test was about to begin, Anna stopped Scroll. "Your Highness. Ever since I met Roland, I've never been envious of anyone, because I feel that this is the biggest gift in my life," she said slowly. Even after knowing that the gods' punishment witches can enter the dream world, they have suffered too much, and the dream world is more like a kind of compensation for them. "But, now I'm really envious of you." She did not hide these words from the other witches, but said them in front of everyone, causing a commotion in the crowd. "Wow, why do I feel a little hot?" Mystery Moon hurriedly covered her face, but deliberately opened her fingers slightly, revealing 2 slits. "Be quiet, don't interrupt." Lily glared at her fiercely. "Anna." Roland could not help but say. Anna smiled at him and then looked at Scroll. "So I have a request." Scroll said softly, "Please say it, Your Highness, as long as it's within my power." In the past, when he told me about the dream world, he only described it verbally, without any pictures. "Can you replace my eyes and take a picture of the apartment he lives in, the places he often lives, and the scenery of that world for me to see?" Anna said seriously, "If you record the picture in the Book of Magic, I should be able to see it, right?" "Of course, leave it to me." "Wow," Mystery Moon suddenly shouted, "I want to see it too. It's best if you can take a picture of the whole city." "Shut up." However, before Lily could stop her, the other witches also clamored, "Can you take a picture of the legendary plane that can carry hundreds of people? I want to see what a square that can accommodate tens of thousands of people looks like." Me too," seeing that her sisters had surrounded Scroll and Anna, Lily stamped her feet and squeezed into the crowd. Nightingale sighed softly in the mist. This was probably why Anna was ahead of her. She could not help but smile bitterly. She clearly believed that her feelings for Scroll were no less than Anna's, but probably only Anna could say such words in front of so many people. Her courage was as bright as a jewel. With great difficulty, Scroll wrote down everyone's requests one by one and finally lay down on the soft chair in the office. Roland directly leaned against the mahogany table, intending to fall asleep like he did during his lunch break. Apart from the 2 of them, Phyllis, Ling and Faldy were also ready. Roland's gaze swept across the crowd and finally fell on Anna, who nodded gently at him. "Then, let the 10th test begin." Chapter 1331. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Scroll took a quarter of an hour longer than before to calm herself down and capture the faintly discernible magical fluctuations in her mind. When she opened her eyes again, she was already in the narrow archives. Phyllis then appeared beside her, in the appearance of a young witch. Hundreds of years had not left any trace on her. Although Phyllis had lived far longer than Scroll, at this moment, Scroll was like an elder to her. "What should we do next?" Scroll asked. "Leave it to me." Phyllis smiled confidently, then opened the iron door and walked out of the room. Scroll hurriedly followed her. The bustling grand city once again appeared in front of her eyes. Phyllis looked around and quickly locked her eyes on a young man who was walking toward her. She pulled Scroll's hand and directly stopped in front of the man. "Hello." Hearing the greeting, the man stopped and looked away from a small box in his hand. He raised his head with a slightly puzzled expression. But the moment their eyes met, the man's eyes revealed an obvious look of surprise. What's the matter?" "I'm sorry, I lost my phone and can't contact my friend." "Can you? I understand. Is $100 enough?" The man quickly took out his wallet from his pocket and handed her a red note. At the same time, there was a hint of regret in his voice. "So be it if you're cheated. But looking at your attire, the person who organized this must have put in a lot of money." Phyllis's smile suddenly stiffened. No, I just want to borrow your phone to make a call. The man was stunned for a moment before realizing that he had said the wrong thing. He awkwardly handed over the small box in his hand and apologized to the two. Phyllis shrugged and pressed a series of numbers. At this moment, Scroll still had not figured out the situation and did not know what to say. She could only pretend to be calm and stand where she was, but her heart was particularly nervous. This place was really too different from the world she was familiar with. A strong sense of strangeness was everywhere, like a wall that pressed down on her and made it hard for her to breathe. Many people around them had already noticed the two of them and swept their undisguised gazes in their direction. Among them, there was no lack of malicious intent. This reminded her of the exposed sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association. Don't worry, all they can do is watch. Phyllis seemed to have sensed her uneasiness. She tilted her head and comforted her. As long as you stare back, they will retreat faster than anyone else. At that moment, a beep came from the small box. Hello, is that Phyllis? It was the voice of His Majesty. In an instant, Scroll felt relieved. This was indeed the dream world, and His Majesty was not far from her. The sense of unfamiliarity was still there, but it wasn't as oppressive as before. Even the naked gazes that were cast at him were no longer as awkward and uncomfortable as before. Scroll took a deep breath and followed her gaze. Just as Phyllis had said, everyone avoided eye contact with her and turned their heads away guiltily. The crowd on the street seemed to move again. It's me. Lady Scrolls is right beside me. The address here was. Yes, that was what the map showed. Was it only 2 kilometers away from the apartment complex? That's great. Yes, I'll wait for you here, Your Majesty, brother. After ending the call, Phyllis threw the small box to the young man. Thanks. No, you're welcome. The young man hesitated for a while and then said hesitantly, can we add each other as friends? Phyllis casually told him a string of numbers. The young man recorded it down as if he had found a treasure, and then happily said goodbye to the two. The small box you borrowed just now, is it the wireless telephone that His Majesty always wants to communicate across thousands of miles? Scroll asked. Yes, the level of technology in this world has already popularized wireless telephones in everyone's hands. Not only can they make calls, but they can also locate directions and search for information. Without it, it's almost impossible to go anywhere. Phyllis explained, because of this, as long as you remember the number, you can contact the other person at any time. If you meet someone you don't want to talk to, you can directly refuse or give them a random number. I see. Scroll suddenly understood. No wonder His Majesty said that if the two of them were really in the same world, they would soon meet again. You, on the other hand, have adapted much faster than I expected. You're worthy of being a mentor of the Witch Union. Phyllis smiled. Scroll gently shook her head and did not answer. She knew where her courage came from. He was already a king, but he still didn't make any progress. Probably only His Majesty would say that the king should protect his subordinates, right? Really, how long will it take for him to become a qualified king? Scroll also felt the same. From the moment the Witch Cooperation Association was sheltered, she should have stood in front of the king. But until now, she was still under his protection, which was really not a qualified performance. But, if everyone was like this, it didn't feel bad. In that case, let's keep the status quo for a while longer. Hey, look at those two. That's a medieval robe. Are they playing Cosby? Speaking of which, the two of them are really beautiful. They don't look much worse than celebrities. Whispers could be heard from time to time, but Scroll no longer felt uneasy. About 10 minutes later, a round car stopped in front of the two of them. Sorry to keep you waiting. His Majesty poked his head out from the driver's seat. Get in. Phyllis opened the door and pulled Scroll into the car. Then, under the incredulous gaze of the onlookers, they swaggered off and disappeared into the traffic on the main road. We're really lucky. Ling, who was sitting in the passenger seat, turned around and said, if the connection point between Her Excellency Scroll's domain and the apartment are only 2 blocks away, Faldy's flying insects can monitor this area 24 hours a day. Faldy nodded. This area has been cleaned up before, and there are no signs of new fallen evils. Safety should be guaranteed. That's good. Roland smiled. So, as the first witch to enter the dream world on her own, how do you feel now, Scroll? Is this the car of the dream world? Scroll touched the chair behind her and knocked on the window. The seat is even softer than a sofa, and it's so quiet and fast. It's so much better than a steam-powered truck. It would be great if we could also build such a high-end vehicle. For some reason, she suddenly felt that Roland's smile was a little stiff, and the other 3 gods' punishment witches also pursed their lips, as if they were enduring something. Did I say something wrong? No, ahem, this day will come sooner or later. Roland cleared his throat. By the way, Your Majesty, where are we going? Scroll looked at the changing scenery outside the window and said, aren't you going to test the realm of consciousness? We can talk about that later. Haven't you noticed that the 2 of you are too eye-catching in your current clothes? Roland said without turning his head. Phyllis's clothes are in the car. You can change them later, but there's nothing suitable for you at the moment. Therefore, the most important task today is naturally to change your traveling clothes. Chapter 1332. Your Excellency Scroll, are you done changing? Ling asked outside the changing room. If you need my help, please don't hesitate to do so. No, it's fine, will be done soon. Scroll's slightly nervous voice came from behind the partition. Roland could not help but raise his eyebrows. This was the first time he had seen Scroll reveal such an unstable mood. In the past, she was always calm and steady in everything she did. This also made him look forward to Scroll's appearance after she changed into a new set of clothes. Whoosh, the partition was pulled open and Scroll carefully walked out of the changing room. Is this, okay? Roland's eyes suddenly lit up. Scroll was wearing a slim, dark blue turtleneck sweater, which perfectly displayed the contours of her upper body. On the outside, she was wearing a black and red half-length robe. The opening of the robe started from below her shoulders and extended all the way to her calves, giving her the charm of an evening gown. Her chest was open, forming an inverted V shape at the waist. Her towering chest and flat abdomen were half hidden, giving her an indescribable sense of beauty at first glance. Overall, her clothes were mainly in dark colors. There was no sense of frivolity at all. Instead, it looked extremely solemn. Coupled with the black-rimmed glasses on Scroll's face and her waist-length black braid, it added a mature and intellectual beauty to her. How beautiful, Phyllis exclaimed. Even among witches, it's enough to be praised. I told you I made the right choice. Ling's tone was rather proud. But, isn't it too revealing? Scroll subconsciously covered her chest with her hands. Of course not, isn't it wrapped up tightly? Faldy laughed. You can even accept the formal dress for the banquet, not to mention this improved version of the winter dress. And in the dream world, everyone wears it like this. Am I right, Your Majesty? Ling joined in. Roland chuckled and shook his head. Although there was underwear and a long sweater underneath, this kind of jacket with the top and bottom split was indeed not suitable for her usual robes. The key is not how other people wear it, but Scroll's own opinion. He paused and looked at Scroll. Do you think you like this set of clothes? Scroll looked at herself in the glass mirror. She had never seen this appearance before. Even if there was a huge difference between the 2 worlds, something like beauty would always be able to transcend countless gaps and resonate with people's hearts. She couldn't deny that she liked her current outfit. Yes. Your Majesty, she replied softly. That's good. Roland called the shop assistant over. I'll take the whole set. Sir, you really have good taste. These are the latest models for this winter, and they are a perfect match for this lady. The shop assistant took out a calculator and pressed for a while. A total of 24,000 yuan. Please pay over here. Ah. Roland held his breath for a moment. That was almost a third of the price of a minivan. However, since he had already boasted, it was too late to back out now. He tilted his head to look at Ling. How did you choose your clothes? I chose the ones with the biggest numbers on the labels. Ling stuck out her tongue. My classmates at school always say that only price doesn't lie. Roland couldn't help but facepalm. Your Majesty, are these clothes very expensive? Scroll leaned over and asked in a low voice. Why don't we just forget about it? I'm the creator of the dream world. How can I be stumped by money? It's a piece of cake. He pretended to be indifferent and bought the clothes. Next, let's have dinner on the second floor of the mall. Yes. The three gods' punishment witches cheered in unison. Your Majesty, what about the test? Don't worry. Roland waved his hand. Time passes faster here, so it won't take long. Besides, it's your first time in the dream world. Of course, you should enjoy yourself first. Tell me what you want to eat later. Anyway, I've already paid for it. It won't cost me much to eat later. I might as well let everyone be happy, he thought. Scroll looked at the four people who were in high spirits and shook her head helplessly. I understand. By the time they walked out of the bustling mall, everyone was already burping from eating. Under Roland's lead, the group of people swept through almost all the restaurants in the city, and when they saw something good, they would order it. From the piping hot crab roe buns to the ice cream mixed with nuts, every single dish was incomparably delicious to Scroll. Although some of the food could be found in Neverwinter, compared to here, it was like comparing His Majesty's small car to a steam truck. Even though she tried her best to control herself, she could only maintain a good table manners. This kind of world is really good. Scroll murmured as she strolled along the spacious street and gazed at the deep night sky. Even though all the stars were covered, the city was still brightly lit. Street lamps illuminated the streets, and snowflakes danced under the soft lights, like fairies decorating the night sky. The city is bright and beautiful, and everyone's face is brimming with smiles. It looks like a dream. Will we be able to build a reality like this one day? Of course, as long as we have enough knowledge. Roland said as he walked with his hands behind his back. This is also the biggest difference between the two sides. Border Town can be transformed into Neverwinter through knowledge, so Neverwinter can also become the dream world one day. And the key to starting this process is right in front of you. In front of me? Scroll was startled. That's right. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. The reason why he brought Scroll here was not just to shop. After crossing the road, the group stood in front of a beautiful building. There was a golden plaque hanging on the main entrance, on which the words, Municipal Library, were written. Scroll could not help but exclaim as they entered the library. The spacious hall was the size of the central square of Neverwinter, and it led straight to the top of the building, which was more than 10 meters high, like a transparent patio. The escalators in the surroundings moved people up and down, while the 5 levels of corridors surrounded the hall in layers. Countless bookshelves were lined up in a row, and every bookshelf was filled with books. Obviously, all the books in Grey Castle, or even all the books in the 4 kingdoms combined could not compare to the collection here. Scroll involuntarily put her hand on her chest. She obviously understood why His Majesty brought her here. This is a place you will definitely come to in the future. Roland smiled. Bring the key to that world for me. She took a deep breath, bowed her head to Roland, and said solemnly, I will not let you down. This was bound to be a time-consuming task, and it was difficult to see any results in a short period of time. But change always started from such a small place. Knowledge was like nourishment. As long as it was sprinkled, it could catalyze people's growth. He had been pushing for this matter to progress, and it was also for this purpose that Ling and the others were sent to school. Scroll's advancement would undoubtedly greatly accelerate this process. As the saying goes, it takes 10 years to grow trees, and 100 years to nurture people. Roland believed that in 100 years, the people in the real world would inevitably undergo earth-shaking changes. Whether they were people without magic or witches with witches. At that time, they would use their own hands to create a brand new, dream world. Chapter 1333. Late at night, Roland drove them back to Lioli Pavilion, which was the street where Scroll had first entered the dream world. Like the Tongzi district, it was an old street, but compared to the former, it was more commercial in nature. On both sides of the street, there were many convenience stores, greenfly restaurants, KTV shops, and internet cafes. They were not big, and the main customers were office workers and students in the neighborhood. Although the environment looked dirty and messy, it was suitable for Scroll to hide her identity. The entrance and exit of the connection point was on the side of the street. From the outside, it looked no different from an ordinary iron gate. As for whether this gate had originally been here or only appeared after Scroll entered the dream world, Roland did not know. However, this location was obviously very important. He was already considering whether to use the relationship between the association and the Clover Group to buy the shops on both sides. After all, Scroll's realm of consciousness could only carry one god's punishment witch. If she was targeted by more than one fallen evils, she would still be in danger. As a key figure in passing on knowledge, she obviously could not take any risks. If he could station a dozen combat witches around the connection point, it would undoubtedly be safer. While the crowd was thinner, Roland did a final test on the interaction between the two realms of consciousness. When the dream world stopped operating, no matter where Scroll was, she would be expelled from the dream world and returned to the small archive. This was also the biggest difference between her and the God's Punishment Witches. Although the God's Punishment Witches' consciousness would return to their own bodies, their position in the dream world would be fixed at the moment they left. This was also the reason why Roland asked them to enter and leave the dream world together at the Rose Cafe or the warehouse next door. Otherwise, when there was a change in personnel, someone might disappear into thin air. Scroll's problem was obviously more serious. At least in an emergency, the God's Punishment Witches could maintain a seamless connection with Roland when entering and exiting the dream world, but Scroll could not do this. This also meant that every time she entered the dream world, she had to start at the archive and end at the archive when she left the dream world. However, considering that as long as Scroll was taught to use a mobile phone, she could always ensure that they were in the right position before waking up from the dream world. Plus, Faldy's magic bug was always monitoring the area, so it was not a difficult problem to solve. This law also holds true in reverse. When Scroll voluntarily left her realm of consciousness, both the God's Punishment Witches and Roland would be forcibly expelled. The former would return to her body in reality, while the latter would appear in front of the Iron Gate. It wasn't a good feeling. It was like riding a roller coaster. The last point was beyond Roland's expectations. After Scroll left the realm of mind, the iron door was still there, but behind it was neither a wall nor the narrow gray room, but a red void. That was the symbol of erosion. According to Garcia, the erosion crevice was not something that could be seen everywhere. The places where it existed would usually be guarded by the association's commissioner. In other words, this erosion should have been brought by the archives. As expected, the relationship between the realm of mind was not simply one of containment and accommodation. Roland realized that they were all a part of the realm of mind and used the power of the origin of magic. This was probably the most appropriate explanation. This was in line with what Lon had said: as long as the dream world devoured more cores, he would have the opportunity to invade the domain of God. Another question popped up in his mind. If the realm of consciousness of other senior demons entered the range of his light beam, what would happen to the dream world? Could they also appear in this city like the scrolls? The next day, Roland received the latest news from the front line. There were 2 letters in the envelope. One was written by Vendi. The letter briefly described the current situation of the witches, and the second half focused on Nana Pine. The little girl, who had followed the witch union all the way, had finally welcomed her day of adulthood. Like Lucia, Mystery Moon, and the others, her magic power had condensed at the moment of adulthood. According to the Union's classification system, she could be considered a real senior witch. The letter didn't explain the specifics of Nana's ability. Maybe everyone was too busy, or maybe Nana's magic power was too precious to be wasted on the test. But Roland didn't care about that. For him, the most important thing was that Nana had safely crossed the threshold. The other letter was much thicker. There were reports from the First Army and proposals from the General Staff Department. This was also a major drawback of the current information transmission channels. In order to save transportation resources, the front line would often wait until a certain number of things needed to be reported before sending it back to Neverwinter. Therefore, even though it was the same letter, some of the contents would differ by a few days or even half a month. Flipping to the end, Roland suddenly frowned. What happened? Nightingale, who was guarding at the side, asked. The demons launched an all-out attack on the First Army, he said in a low voice, just a week ago. Gust Castle, Kingdom of Wolfheart. The shrill alarm rang through the city again. This was the third time since sunrise. Damn monsters, don't they know fatigue? Jottle spat on the ground and took out a paper bag from his pocket. He poured it for a long time but could not pour out anything. Here. A hand suddenly stretched out from beside him. This is what you're looking for, right? Jottle tilted his head and realized that the speaker was Fairy. She handed him a small white pill. You don't need this. He picked up the pill hesitantly. I'm not as weak as you. It's just a day or two without sleep, Fairy replied expressionlessly. And I hate these things. Who knows what they're made of? I advise you to eat less. Maybe you're right. Jottle let out a long breath and tossed the pill into his mouth. But at least it can keep me alive for now. When the pill dissolved on his tongue, an extremely bitter taste quickly filled his mouth. At the same time, the bone-piercing chill in the air and the dizzying tiredness and exhaustion seemed to have been swept away. Even his stiff fingers and limbs became flexible. He felt that he had once again become a sharp hunter and not an exhausted prey waiting to be slaughtered. This was the feeling. Jottle raised his spear and placed it firmly in the shooting position. These pills had only been distributed to every soldier as a ration half a month ago. Its official name was Delaying Agent, but everyone preferred to call it Tumbling Pill. Just one pill could completely block out the body's pain, and it would only explode after a few hours. Although some of the Sand Nation people were quite resistant to this drug at first and even associated it with the legendary Pill of Madness, such voices soon disappeared. The reason was that the First Army did not force the use of Delaying Agent. Furthermore, the characteristics of the side effects were clearly stated on the packaging, and it was forbidden to take it continuously. This was completely different from the rumors Jottle had heard about Princess Tardara. Other than the Sand Nation troops, the Northerners also received the Delaying Agent. Even the officers were no exception. This also dispelled most people's suspicions. Some people even said that the medicine could have been made fragrant and sweet, but to prevent people from eating it like a snack, they added a bitter taste. And when the demons started their frenzied attack, this white pill instantly won the trust of all the soldiers. Facing the enemy's attacks from dawn to dusk, Jottle could not imagine how he could last dozens of hours in this kind of high-intensity battle with almost no rest without the Delaying Agent. As an experienced hunter, he naturally understood the difference between fighting in perfect condition and fighting continuously with exhaustion. As long as he did not die immediately after taking it, he could accept any serious side effects. Chapter 1334. On the other hand, someone like Fairy who strongly rejected the tumbler pill seemed like an anomaly. But seeing that he was in good spirits, Jottle didn't think too much about it. It was difficult to even protect oneself on the battlefield, not to mention others. It was already the 8th day since the start of the battle. 8 days ago, their defensive line was still outside Gust Castle, the crossfire of machine guns and cannons making it difficult for the demons to advance. But as time passed, traces of the enemy appeared in all directions of the defensive line. Huge skeletons began to pierce the area between Gust Castle and Metalstone Ridge, turning the weakly defended area into a red fog zone. The aerial knight tried to stop them, but it was to no avail. When the demons used these fortress-type monstrous beasts to surround them from both sides, the cannon's attacks were scattered. To prevent the army from being surrounded, they retaliated while retreating to the rear. The next step was to repeat the process. The enemy's attack was like an endless tide, and everyone felt great pressure. The rest time was also reduced from the normal rotation to 4 to 5 hours. Although there were several reinforcements from the rear, the gap in the number of people was so big that it was obvious at a glance. There were no more than 2,000 soldiers at the front line, and the demons' attacks were all above 20,000. The devil beasts even bypassed the defensive line and charged in the direction of the Cage Mountain. Even though they couldn't understand the situation there, it was clear that the rear was not safe either. And just 3 days ago, the frontline troops received the order to retreat into the city. At the same time, the demons' attacks on the west suddenly intensified. This was undoubtedly a signal. The metal stone ridge to the west of the First Army had probably fallen, and now it was their turn. A day later, the enemy broke through the front line for the first time and engaged the soldiers in close combat. At this point, the battle had completely become a battle of wills. Jodl cast his gaze towards the dilapidated short wall a few hundred meters away. The outer wall of Gust Castle was now riddled with holes, the corpses of demons hung from it, and the blood that flowed out caused the wall to be dyed with a layer of eerie blue. And the distance from the short wall to the defensive line was like purgatory. Soldiers and berserk demons were mixed together, half of them buried in snow, the other half frozen in the cold wind, like naturally formed statues. Due to the continuous attacks of the enemy, they didn't even have time to collect the dead. Bone spears and stone needles were stuck on both sides of the long street, like barbs growing out of the earth. Since not everyone could hide in the fortifications, every time it rained needles, it was a lucky draw for the soldiers hiding in the houses and trenches. One of them pierced through the wall of the room and landed less than a meter away from him. If he had been a little more biased, he would have already gone to serve the three gods. Bah! Jodl shook his head and threw these inauspicious thoughts out of his mind. When the clan was in danger, no matter how many times he prayed to the three gods, he never received a response. This time, naturally, it was not the three gods' protection. Perhaps he would eventually die in this foreign city, but before that, he would definitely make the enemy pay a painful price. The great chief had promised that he would not mistreat any clan that had fought for the fate of mankind. That was his purpose for coming here. They're here. Fairy warned. There were no sounds of cannons. The artillery position had been completely silent last night. Some said that it was a sneak attack by devil beasts, while others said that the artillery had moved ahead of time. But no matter what, they could only rely on themselves to defend against the enemy now. The figures of the demons finally appeared on top of the wall. The first to open fire was still the machine gun squad. Other than the longsong cannons, the loud and continuous sound of the machine gun was the most pleasant sound in the soldiers' hearts. The flying bullets scattered the snow beside the wall. The first demon that climbed over the wall was instantly shot down, and the demon that followed closely behind it also had their skulls blown off by the rain of bullets. Gunshots also rang out from the east and west sides of the city. This was clearly another fierce siege. Jodl didn't care about the demons charging directly into the firing line. Instead, he focused his attention on the streets around 100 meters away. After 3 days of defending the city, he had already understood one thing. The most dangerous place was often not the place where the firepower was focused, but the seemingly quiet street corners. At this moment, the First Army no longer had a fixed line of defense. The troops were scattered around the blockhouses in groups. Their most important task was to prevent the demons from sneaking close to the permanent fortifications. Even if he wanted to attack the enemies hundreds of meters away, it would be difficult for him to accurately hit them. Suddenly, 5 or 6 mad demons appeared on the roof of a 2-story mud building. They seemed to be planning to use the building to bypass the area with the most firepower. This action completely exposed them to Jodl's gun. He held his breath, aimed at the demon walking at the end, and pulled the trigger. The target fell in response. Fairy and the other 2 teammates followed suit and opened fire. The fragile wooden roof couldn't support the mad demon's large movements at all. As they climbed slowly, they became the most eye-catching targets. 4 o'clock, a large number of demons have been spotted in the 4 o'clock direction. Before they could finish off this small group of escaped demons, a sand nation behind them cried out in alarm. They're coming this way. Leave this place to me. Fairy shouted. You guys go deal with the other side. Jodl immediately turned his gun around and ran to another window. The most accurate shooter among his teammates was undoubtedly Fairy. If he said he could finish off the remaining demons, then there would definitely be no problem. But when he saw hundreds of demons swarming towards their hiding place, Jodl's heart sank slightly. Damn it, were those guys just now testing us? Someone exclaimed. I'm afraid so. He immediately made a judgment. Everyone, don't conserve your ammunition. After we finish off this wave of demons, move towards the 6 o'clock direction. Concentrated gunshots instantly rang out from the window. Among them were the new automatic weapons issued by the troops. Compared to the roar of the Mark I type, the new weapon, known as the general-purpose machine gun, had a crisper sound, but its firing rate was no slower than those huge monsters. The only drawback was that its magazine could only hold 30 rounds, so its suppressive ability was inferior to the former. But the enemies clearly didn't expect that the top of a small clock tower could explode with such astonishing firepower. Under the head-on attacks of the general-purpose machine gun and rocket launchers, more than half of the hundreds of demons were instantly killed, while the remaining enemies raised their bone spears. Pay attention to the spears. Jodl warned loudly as he suddenly crouched down. Dozens of bone spears shot out like arrows from a bow, piercing the top of the clock tower in the blink of an eye. Clang! The copper bell that was struck let out a series of buzzing sounds. If it was on flat ground, it would be difficult to escape from this attack. However, the difference in elevation formed a natural concealment area. Even if the bone spears shot from below filled the windows, it would be difficult for them to hit the soldiers lying on the ground. The gunshots only stopped for a moment before resuming again. The remaining mad demons were caught in a dilemma. They were almost certain that they would be able to finish off this small team of enemies. Jodl couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He also felt a little regretful. He heard that the general-purpose machine gun was expensive, and it had to be used by the Air Knight first. If the frontline troops had one, even if they didn't rely on the cover, the demons would still be no match for them. But at that moment, Fairy suddenly screamed, "Oh no, get out of here!" He was stunned, and instinctively turned his head to look. There was a breach in the city wall in the distance. A huge spider demon climbed over the wall and crouched down. It opened the shell on its back, and the dark stone pillar faintly glowed. Wait, could it be aiming at them? Jodl raised his head. The copper bell hanging on the beam of the roof was still trembling slightly. Damn it, it was the bell just now. He picked up his gun and ran down the stairs. And at the same time, a light chime came from afar. Bang! Before he could run down the first floor, the black stone pillar that was thicker than a human flew in a high parabola and smashed straight into the middle of the clock tower. With a loud rumble, the entire tower collapsed.